Hope everyone's having a good Tuesday night. Here with my brother Cody.
How's it going, everybody?
We're going to talk about a little bit of everything, a little bit of news.
Because I couldn't go to anybody else. I was very scared. I was afraid of what was going to be said about me.
What's going to be said about me?
And this is making me think of Space Coast, Coast to Coast, or like Coast to Coast Radio or something.
Yeah, and this is copyright free, so I can. Will you just stop, YouTube? Come on. So yeah, I hope everyone's doing good. My brother was just telling me about Lord of the Rings. He's been reading the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and he's just about done. You're getting close to the end.
Yeah, I have 2 chapters left. Frodo and Sam and Gandalf and Merry and Pippin have almost returned to the Shire after all that mayhem. Actually, I was asking, and I didn't actually get an answer out of you, but I was curious if you thought that was if it was cheating to listen to an audiobook, because that's what I've been doing. I haven't been reading it. I've been listening to it.
Well, I don't think it's cheating. I think it's better for a lot of reasons. I think when you're just sitting back listening, especially if it's the right narrator, you can kind of really focus on the story, you know. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that prefer to read. I've never been a big reader, which is actually something I'm kind of ashamed of. I've always been kind of more of a TV guy, which is
I've always been ashamed about not finishing the Lord of the Rings books, because I kind of have always professed to be such a fan of it or something,
Right.
you know.
right.
And then I always felt like if somebody was going to call me out, they were going to ask me, like, did you read the books, you know? And I wouldn't have a really good response.
Yeah, well, and I felt that way about Game of Thrones too for the longest time. Like,
I felt that way too.
You
I read
know?
the first book, Game
Yeah.
of Thrones,
Mhm.
and it was probably for that reason.
yeah, just the guilt of if I'm a real fan, I better.
I was sick of looking at memes where people were saying, you're not a real fan if you haven't read the books, chump, you know?
But I don't know. I feel like that's kind of unfair. The big thing is, for me, it's hard to read a book when I know that the show that I watched or the movie that I watched is pretty damn close to it. You know, and there's not going to be a bunch of surprises until way later down the road. I guess I could have skipped, you know, a Game of Thrones and Feast for Crows and, you know, or whatever the earlier ones are, and then jump straight to the later ones. But
There's nuanced differences, though.
yeah,
There's different, and it's not. I guess the differences are one thing, but the other thing to consider is that if you really love it, you might try to immerse yourself in it. Like,
right.
I'm almost done with Lord of the Rings, and now I'm considering reading Silmarillion and the Book of Lost Tales, despite how bad I've heard that they are, or at least how boring anyway.
Well, I did try to read, I think it was the Book of Lost Tales 1 and the Silmarillion. They had, in our high school library, they had copies of those. And, you know, I read a good chunk of the Fellowship as well, because we owned the Fellowship and the Two Towers and the Return of the King, but...
Do you know where those are? Those
think
books?
I think I probably have some of them. I'll look for them after. But it was the same thing, like, especially with the Fellowship, because the Fellowship is so slow for a long time. It was like, I already know, like, where they're going and,
Right.
and what's, you know, like, should I read something else? So that's why I tried reading Silmarillion and Book of... But, dude, the Silmarillion especially was like it was like the Bible of Tolkien.
Yeah.
Like, just talking about bloodlines, and then this king bestowed onto his son the power of Anduil, and it's like, well, I don't give a fuck about any of this. Too dry, man.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing about Tolkien, is that he was a philologist.
Right.
And as a creator of language, he was all he really was is like a world builder. He was like a dungeon master before there was Dungeons and Dragons.
Yep.
You know.
Yep. Writing languages, creating races, and
Right.
yeah, and he was I don't know. What does philologist mean?
A professor. Well, I'm not sure if he was a professor, but he worked in the study of language,
Right.
which is what philology is.
And he also was I don't know if he was a professor of this, but he was like a master of fairy tales, like Celtic history and
Mythology and stuff like that.
mythology, Yeah. That's an interesting guy. Also, like best friends with, is that loose?
No, I think. Well, it's loose if I drop it, but I think if I keep it up, it's fine. C.S. Lewis, right?
Yeah, which is kind of interesting. Like
Yeah.
two of the most influential fantasy writers ever being good buddies like that.
What you know about them? Do you know if they like would give each other work to read over or to edit or anything
yeah, I
like
don't
that, or maybe
know.
if they were giving each other ideas?
I don't know how much they involved each other in their processes. I mean, to me they're vastly different
Yeah,
kinds of storytellers.
definitely.
You know? And it does make you wonder if like Tolkien ever gave C.S. Lewis shit for like his story being a little bit too childish, or
Right.
you know.
Well, I've really enjoyed listening to Tolkien because I've enjoyed getting the deeper parts of the, you know, what they call the legendarium, Tolkien's world. Like one of the things that you would ask me, I think the last time I was over here, is you would ask me why Aragorn lived to be over 200.
Yeah.
And at the time, I didn't really know, and we had maybe wondered if it was because Arwen had given him her star or whatever it was, the Light of Elendil or something like that. But it actually is, and I picked this up obviously at some point when I was reading Return of the King. But he is of the race of Numenor, which I didn't know, but the race of Numenor is actually descended from elves. So they're men, but they're descended from elves, and if you want like better Lord of the Rings history, you will definitely look it up. But the race of Numenor comes from a high elf bloodline. There were like two brothers, and from one of those brothers, I believe, is Elrond's line, and the other race is the Numenorian men of the West.
So what happened? Was there some sort of fast-acting evolution, or did they just inbreed with other men and kind of create?
It doesn't really explain all of the differences. Again, I'd say like if you really wanted, you know, I'm sure you could get a much better depiction of this or explanation of this than what I could give you from just listening to the audiobook. But yeah, they're Numenorian and they're part elf. Which is kind of interesting.
That's really interesting.
And maybe makes more sense why Aragorn ends up with Arwen instead of Eowyn at the end.
I guess that would have been too much extra bullshit
Oh, there was so
to include in the movies. Like,
if you watch the movies and you're like, damn, there's so much extra bullshit when you're watching the movies.
Yeah.
It's way worse when you watch or read the books.
yeah, I mean the movies, even though they are long movies, you could tell that they had to kind of streamline some of the shit just to get the story down. And I love the movies, but I still think The Fellowship is the best.
I think it's good. I really like Return of the King. You know what's funny? One of the big complaints about Return of the King is that it has too many endings.
Yeah.
Like, they kill Sauron, and then there's
Yeah.
like an ending, and then another ending, and it keeps like cutting to a dark screen, and then reopening to another ending, and, and it happens over and over.
It's like, what the fuck?
But as I figured out, that's not Peter Jackson's fault. That's the way the books are written, because Sauron dies, and then there's like 9 other chapters after that,
Right.
and even more bullshit after that.
Right.
That like I feel like if you were like, you know, if Tolkien was just an author and not just considering world building and all this other stuff, he would have cut it much sooner with like a happily ever after type thing. But instead, like Saruman goes to the Shire and takes over the Shire,
Right,
and
right,
like, all this
yeah.
extra stuff happens at the very end of it all, you know.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that, how the hobbits have to go take the Shire back. And it's like, what? But in a way, you do have to give them credit, because so many movies nowadays, and probably books too, but so many movies will do that thing where like you take out the queen bee or you take out the lord, and then everyone just scatters.
Right.
And I don't know how realistic that is. Like,
Not realistic. No.
wouldn't there be like another warlord that kind of fills the vacuum and like,
Right.
keep going, boys. Meat's back on the menu. It's just ridiculous.
Did I tell you about that Facebook group I got into?
Uh-uh.
It's called We Pretend to Be the Orcs of Mordor.
What? We pretend to be the...
So all they do is they, as a group, they'll call out like another Facebook page, like a fundraiser for somebody or like a Harry Potter group or something like that, and they'll invade it and just shit post it with orc memes. And like Grond memes in particular. And I've never actually gotten involved with the shit posting, but it's pretty fucking hilarious to observe. They'll find some kid with like cerebral palsy and shit, go
Oh,
shit post his
no.
page. It's like, what
Oh.
are you doing? Rough.
The internet has created a whole new class of person, the troll. You know?
Yeah.
Like before
It's
you
rough.
could be a shithead, you could play pranks on people and stuff, but the internet really created a place where trolls can thrive and
Yeah.
grow. And
I tried to explain it to Gina, my girlfriend, and she was like, "What?" Of course, it's like hilarious to me, and she doesn't get it at all. You know,
that's
really
the thing
funny.
about a good meme. Like, there's going to be a portion of the population that either doesn't get it or doesn't think it's funny, and then everyone else is just like, "Oh my god." It's classic.
Man, the internet is really degenerating almost. Or
Oh, it's bad, man.
it's progressing, and the people who are like sucked up into the vacuum of it are degenerating.
It's well, I mean, society in general, I feel like it's kind of going down the shitter.
It's getting worse.
You ever feel like that? Like, what's going on with human beings in 2020, man?
I definitely feel like that. Basically, pretty much every day. There was a time where I was like, oh, YouTube and the internet, these are the greatest inventions. Like, no doubt the greatest invention so far of the 21st century. You could learn anything. You have access to all this different knowledge. And then you see the stuff that people like post on YouTube and like believe fervently without any evidence and like
and not just the stuff people post, because you would expect dumb stuff, but the stuff that's popular, the stuff
Right.
that other people
Right.
appreciate too. It's
Right.
like, what is going on, man?
make you lose faith.
Yeah, like we're devolving. I know that's like a kind of a popular thing to say, but it does seem like, you know, because this idea that evolution is always going to make a species better, that's just not true.
No.
You know, a
It's-
species is going to evolve depending on their surroundings and what's
Yeah.
necessary, and we've created this cushy fucking world where we don't really have to challenge ourselves physically or mentally. And when you look at the priorities that at least a good majority of humanity nowadays in the Western world, at least, you look at their priorities and it's like, dude, we're going backwards, man.
Well, it's yeah,
Like the mask thing, like people freaking out over wearing a mask, and like,
the same people who are arguing that wearing a mask won't protect you from the virus are also arguing that wearing a mask will prevent you from breathing oxygen. Yeah, yeah. That wearing a mask, you will get too much CO2. I think it's a condition called hypoxia, and not enough oxygen. But they're the same people who will also tell you that it won't actually keep a virus out.
Right, so it's stopping.
Right.
It's stopping oxygen
Yeah.
and trapping CO2,
Right.
but
I don't know.
even if you don't think a mask works, though, like to kick and scream and to like push down a Walmart employee because they're making you wear a mask.
Well, I can't stand the people who are like crying tyranny over it. This is tyrannical.
Yeah.
I have to
Yeah.
wear a face mask when I
Yep.
grocery shop. And you know, like how far have we fallen? Like there was once like tyranny in this country.
Yeah.
And it, the British weren't like, you have to wear face masks. You have to
Right.
wear paper face masks when you get your meat at the market.
And in this country, there is tyranny.
But that's not it.
That's not it. Like,
Yeah,
why
right.
don't you talk about like the NDAA or the drug war?
Oh,
you know
yeah.
what's happening to black communities? Like,
Yeah.
why don't you talk about the actual authoritarianism? Not wearing a mask. It's. I saw this. There was a tweet where this lady had posted. I go to Walmart with my kids and I walk down aisles without a mask on and I cough, and it was like, fuck you, basically, to the world, and all these people liked it. Not a week later, dude, she had COVID, and she was posting on Twitter things like, please pray for me and my family, I have a lot of kids, I'm really worried. It's like, bitch, how could you change your tune like that fast?
Well, it's lack of empathy, Like people see a group of other people sick, like 120,000 people dead, and it's just like a number to them, and it's
Right.
not really real until it affects them personally, and then their whole life changes, and then it's like,
And
send me your prayers.
it's like a political thing now at this point too.
Oh,
Like,
well, that's
they've people on the right have bought into this bullshit that it's all the Democrats are trying to hurt Trump. This virus isn't shit. But to me, it's like, okay, well, believe that if you want to believe that. But when you catch the virus, don't come back to us saying to pray for you.
Well, the thing about it is that at this point, the fact that states like Florida and Texas have had to reverse their initial positions and institute mandates that require people to wear viruses, and have even in some cases like closed bars, restricted capacity, like gone to all of these measures
Yeah.
that in the very beginning they were decrying as
Right.
tyrannical. Like our governor, MLG, the MLG, when she did that stuff, everybody was acting like she was a crazy tyrant who was like overreacting to the pandemic and everything, especially like, our Republican friends to the south and east of us. But now they've had to do the same thing, and they have Republican leadership there. So I don't even know at this point how anyone could continue to believe that these aren't the right policies.
Right. And that it's a political...
When Republican
Yeah.
leadership in Florida and Texas and now
Yep.
Arizona and these different places is having to do the same fucking thing.
Well, I think this second wave is going to be no joke, dude. Because the thing about the first wave is more people were fearful of COVID when the first wave came. Because we didn't know as much about it, and
Right.
and now we've had like 3 months or 4 months to accept COVID and to live in this reality. And I think people are fed up with sitting inside. People are fed up with, which
People
I
want-
get, man. I understand you want to go out to eat. Look, no one wanted this. No one wanted this.
No.
To think that this is some sort of political ploy when literally the whole world, and both political parties are bought and paid for by corporations, the whole world is losing money over this thing.
Right.
Everything is losing money over this thing. No one's making money on businesses being closed. You'd have to be a retard to believe that.
Well, by and large, you are absolutely correct. But there is a group of billionaires whose wealth has grown substantially
Well,
as a result of
They
this.
might have invested in like hand sanitizer
Well,
and
guys like Bezos, who's a great example.
Yeah,
Amazon in the midst of this shit
Yep.
has flourished.
Yep. If you had a webcam company, You're making a
Right.
shit because all those people
Right.
are working at home.
If you're delivering groceries to people's houses
Right.
in every major American
Mhm.
city, you're in a good fucking business during a pandemic.
but
know.
generally speaking,
Right.
the majority of industry is losing.
Sure.
You know, and it.
Yep.
So to believe that like, oh, they're just doing this for politics, like, don't you think they care more about money than? Because they do. They all care more about money.
What about those senators who, in the very beginning of this shit, like in January, were getting
Mm-hmm.
intel, and
And
they were I believe they were even on like the Senate like
Yeah, they were
intelligence
on a
or
committee.
like some sort
Yeah.
of committee where they all met and they all talked about COVID or coronavirus, whatever they're
Mhm.
referring to it at that point, and they knew it was going to be a fucking pandemic. They were being told it was going to be a pandemic. They turned around and sold their stocks and bought stocks
Yep.
in like pharmaceuticals and healthcare companies and mask making companies and all this stuff, and they're facing no punishment for this. They
It's-
didn't tell their people or anybody.
It's the definition of insider trading. And look, if you're Martha Stewart and you're just like a wealthy lady that isn't really connected politically, then you get shafted, you know? But if you're a politician and you're connected with everyone, then you can. We've seen it time and time again where politicians and their cronies, the people that are working under them, do all sorts of abhorrent things and get away with it because they're all peers. They're all,
Right.
you know, even Republicans and Democrats. It reminds me of in the Middle Ages how kings wouldn't really kill each other. You know, the King of France, the King of England. They there was an understanding there that
They just killed each other's underlings.
well, and they would take each other for ransom and stuff from time to time.
Right.
But there was an understanding there that royalty and nobility didn't fuck with each other like that because
Right.
they knew they could be the guy that gets sacked the next
Right.
time.
Yeah, they don't
You
want
know?
to set that precedent.
No.
You start beheading kings.
And it's the
And
same thing with
yeah.
politicians. It doesn't matter if you're right or left. They understand that they're playing this weird game and kind of skirting the law in many situations. And so for a Democrat to go after a Republican in such a way would set a precedent, and none of them would be safe after that, you know?
Right.
So I think that all those politicians, when it comes to money, when it comes to something big like this, there isn't a single one of them that's going to make up a pandemic conspiracy to try to hurt another politician. That's insanity.
You think
You
Trump's going to win? Just curious. If you had to bet, somebody was like, throw your money down, everything you got, one way or the other.
Before the BLM stuff, I thought he would. Now I don't think so.
It's hard. The thing is, it's hard to see him winning again. But for me, at least, it was hard to see him winning the first time. Not that I thought Hillary Clinton was a good candidate or was like the president we needed or anything like that.
But none of us saw
But I
that.
didn't see Donald Trump being the president
No.
in 2016. You know,
It wasn't even
I was shocked
feasible.
when he got through the Republican candidates. I was like, what's going on? You know. And then when he faced Hillary, I feel like like everybody else, sat around thinking he would certainly lose. And I feel that way now. Is like, God, if at this point you still want to vote for this dude, like I understand not wanting to vote for Biden because he's a total piece of shit too. But, you know, the 60 million Americans or whatever who are going to show up in November and vote for Trump make no fucking sense to me.
Well, a big part of the problem is there are two realities that are existing simultaneously. I mean, there are guys on YouTube, like, do you know who Tim Pool is?
No.
I used to be subscribed to Tim Pool because Tim will point out things that I agree with. The problem with Tim is he's so biased. He's one of those guys that like constantly claims he's a lefty, right? But every video he makes is a pro-Trump, anti-lefty video, and it's like I could see what you're. And that's a popular thing on YouTube to do to say
Yeah.
to be the Republican that's actually on the Democrat side is popular because then Democrats will subscribe to you because they can be like, look, this guy's a Republican and he agrees.
You know who I'm thinking of right now? Candace Owens, dude.
Candace Owens.
She is the
You see-
epitome of that.
You see a lot of black people doing that, a lot of black people that are quote unquote conservative, and it's because there's a million white dudes out there that you could watch that are conservative.
Yeah.
But that's like you're hitting on something when you're the black guy that's like, yo, man, I was raised in the hood. Let me tell you something. Trump all the way. Like, there's a bunch of whiteys out there that'll be like, oh, this
Well, yeah, they just want to like, you know, dude, she is some Grima worm tongue ass motherfucker.
she's the worst.
She is like the worst
She's
human
the
being.
worst. She's not even by Republican standards.
She's terrible.
She's bad. Like, she was saying the other day that it should be illegal to burn the flag, and I'm like, bitch, you're either pro free speech. I'm sick of these fucking people that are like bandwagoners. They're like, yeah, free speech, and then when someone wants to do something they disagree with, they're like, well, that should be illegal. Like, no, you're either pro or you're not.
Yeah.
You either want people to be able to express it. If it's not affecting someone else, they can
Right.
do it. End of story. You know, whether or not I don't necessarily agree with it. I wouldn't burn the flag. Like, I don't have a reason to do that.
It's a legitimate form of protest, though.
It's
The point of protest is it's supposed to make people who are not necessarily in the middle of the fight uncomfortable.
right.
That's the point of protest. You don't get anywhere when you protest, you know, like doing something normal or ordinary or that people don't hesitate when they look at.
Right.
You know,
Well, like with the kneeling at the NFL games,
oh,
like
absolutely.
if you were supposed to kneel or it was accepted to kneel, then that wouldn't be a form of protest.
Right.
Like all these people that are like, "Oh, you're disrespecting the flag."
Right.
You don't understand what protesting is, do you?
Right.
Like the whole point of protesting is disruption. It's going
Yeah.
against what you're supposed to do. And that's another one. Like, I'm sure Candace Owens hates the fact that people are kneeling during the national anthem, but we live in America. Like,
Yeah.
as far as I'm concerned, if Drew Brees or any other, football player wants to draw a pentagram on their forehead, and Zeke Kyle during the national anthem, they can fucking do it. Does it affect you? Is it hurting you?
Right. Well,
it's
I think
expression.
the thing about the common argument for the kneeling anyway is that yes, you have freedom of speech, but people will say in response to that, they'll say, but not on the company's dollar. They'll say, when I'm at work, if somebody played the national anthem and I'm in my like hardware store, like clothes or outfit or wherever I work, I can't fucking kneel during the national anthem and expect my employer not to get upset about it.
There's a bunch of things wrong with that. First of all, we're talking about pro NFL players
Right.
who are super skilled. Like, from an ownership standpoint, say you have a quarterback like Cam Newton, who's, I know in recent years he hasn't been great, but he's won an MVP. There's a lot of potential upside there. And he's kneeling during your national anthem. What really matters to you when you're the owner? What
Well,
really matters to you? Like,
I think that's always been my response is that the owner's not paying the player for what they're doing on the sidelines or what they're doing when the jersey's on. The owner's paying them for what they do on the field.
exactly.
It's their statistical numbers on the field that matter.
And they're paying a premium for it. Like, if you're a shitty quarterback
Right.
and you're like constantly protesting in ridiculous ways and the ownership gets mad and gets rid of you, that's fine.
Yeah.
Part of the thing about having a capitalistic system is it should be a meritocracy. So even if there was a quarterback out there that was always being a douchebag, if when the game starts he's on the field and he's fucking flinging touchdowns and he's a team player and he listens to the coach and he wins the goddamn game and he wins the goddamn Super Bowl, it doesn't matter what he does off the field. It really doesn't, because
Yeah.
the coach isn't paying for, like you said, he's not paying for what you do on the
Right.
sideline. It's all merit at that point. And that's one of the things about Colin Kaepernick. Colin Kaepernick had 2, maybe 3 years where he was productive.
Towards the end, he wasn't really very good.
He was maybe good enough to be a backup. But again, like, if you're the owner of a team, do you want someone that's that outspoken and causes that much media? Do you want that guy if he's just going to be your backup? No.
Well, no, but here's kind of what's happened, at least recently, with the Colin Kaepernick story, is now he's getting interest again from NFL. Supposedly multiple NFL teams are looking into bringing him on as a quarterback again, and you have to wonder if they're just like,
Virtue signaling.
exactly,
Yeah.
they're piggybacking on this movement, and they're just trying to pick up Kaepernick now. Kaepernick hasn't been in the NFL for 3 years.
Right.
3 or 4 years.
Yeah, to assume he's better now than he was when he was.
And I'm actually a Kaepernick fan. I always liked Kaepernick, and when he kneeled, I thought it was a good move, because he was kneeling for something that I thought was a legitimate gripe that he might have with our American system.
Even if you don't agree with Black Lives Matter, like, who gives a fuck if the guy kneels before the? Why are people so sensitive? Like,
well, that's it. Is that people are sensitive on both sides. The same group of people who want to call one side snowflakes are themselves snowflakes.
Yep.
And that's not to detract from the left being snowflakes. They are too.
Well, certain
Yeah.
people on the left.
Certain things trigger the left, and certain things trigger the right.
Yeah, there's no.
Well, it's like Confederate. It's like the whole thing with like Confederate monuments that's happening right now, and like Confederate statues being taken down.
They're
like,
traitors.
They were traitors, and here's the thing about that is, like, you and I have ancestors that fought in the Confederacy.
Yep.
And that's something that as a person I've actually like kind of reconciled with, especially with everything that's been going on. It's something that's been more in my mind. Is not that it's like my heritage that, the Confederacy, but like the actual realization that my ancestors were fucking wrong, dude. They were on the wrong side of history, doing the wrong thing.
But here's the thing. So in no like fair, just nation would you ever punish someone for their family's mistakes. You look at China and North Korea, and like there are certain crimes that could get your family thrown in prison, right?
Sure.
Now, take that a step further and look at ancestors. If you go far enough back in anyone's family tree, they had an ancestor that was a fucking bad person, somewhere. Maybe they had a bunch of them. Maybe it was 1,000 years ago. Maybe for a lot of Americans it was only 150 or 200 years ago, whatever. But to feel guilt about the past is normal. To feel like personal guilt because your ancestors were part of the past is not normal, because me and you didn't. I mean, we did not. We grew up in the 90s and in the early 2000s. We've never been racist people. We obviously didn't own slaves. I don't condone owning people.
No, no. And I don't think that I felt guilt as in like guilt about my actions. As they were, but I do feel like, you a lot of times you just want to feel pride for what your ancestors have done, or what they, and every single person has like a lot, like you say your ancestors, or we say, your ancestors, but that means more than just a single line.
Right.
By the time you get back to your grandparents, it's already 4 lines. By the time your great grandparents 8, by the time we get back to the Civil War, we're talking about like maybe 16 or 32 different families that would eventually provide genetics which would make up individuals who exist in our time.
Right.
And when I say that, it maybe it makes it sound like it was a long time ago. It wasn't that long ago.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it wasn't that long ago. But what I'm
4
saying
generations.
is that, we have ancestors that fought on the North, fought for the Union, and we have ancestors that fought for the Confederacy.
Yep.
And
what is this? What does this do?
there's something to be said for not just blindly having pride in whatever your ancestors might have believed, and being able to recognize that they were wrong. And
the Confederate thing, like, especially because not only is it like, it'd be one thing if there were a bunch of slave owners in the South and the North outlawed it and the South reluctantly went along with it, right? And then now the people in the South were respecting some of the slave owners, that existed prior to that. That'd be one thing. That's their ancestry. Like, as long as you're not celebrating the fact that they own slaves, because again, like, Thomas Jefferson and George Washington owned slaves, and I don't think we should be tearing down their statues. What makes the Confederate thing different is they were literally traitors. Like, if you're an American, I don't care how many ancestors we had that fought for the Confederates, but if you're an American, they were traitors. They fought against America. They fought against the president of the United States. They fought against the national interests. And not only were they traitors, because in certain circumstances a rebellion could be a good thing. Look at Star Wars. But they were traitors on the wrong side of history. They were traitors that were fighting to enslave people.
Well, yeah, and I think that those ends are certainly what make their movement in particular on the wrong side of history. Not only that they lost the war, but that ultimately they were trying to secede from the Union because they were trying to maintain slavery.
Exactly. I mean, I could get behind if there was a rebellion of people back then that were fighting tyranny and the federal government was being tyrannical, and it was just that simple. You know, it really did just boil down to states' rights and tyranny. Then I could understand, and I could actually support people wanting to recognize their ancestors that took part in that. But slavery is gross, man.
Oh, absolutely. I don't disagree with that.
You could say state rights and this and that, but the crux of the issue, the crux of the whole state rights issue was slavery.
Yeah.
It was the fact that the North wanted to outlaw slavery and the South, wanted to keep their slaves for economic reasons and whatever. And it's gross. It's gross. And look, if you're in the South, you don't need to feel shame because you didn't exist then. You should feel shame now if you have a Confederate flag on your wall, and if you're fucking a racist, you should definitely feel shame.
Well, there's a lot of irony that the same group that has the Confederate flag is also the group that's attacking Colin Kaepernick for kneeling during the national anthem. There's so much
hugely ironic.
You don't kneel during the national anthem because that's disrespectful to Americans who fought and died in wars. But then the Confederate flag, the 600,000 Americans died during the Civil War, which was fought over slavery because of the Confederates. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
there's a lot of illogic there, but
it's the equivalent of having. Oh, well, I mean, this might sound like a stretch because obviously the Holocaust was pretty bad, but like having a Nazi flag and then getting mad that someone's kneeling for the American flag, but you have a fucking swastika on your wall, man. You do understand we fought the Nazis, right?
Right.
And what the Nazis were all about? Okay. Yeah, it's nuts, man.
Well. But it brings up other questions because now, this is kind of, I guess, off topic, and we're probably moving quickly through the topics now.
That's fine.
But now there's a Boogaloo movement, and there's a lot of different anti-government, kind of, I think the argument could definitely be made that at this point in time, maybe a splitting of the Union would be the best thing for this country. Well, I don't mean the best thing for this country is in the best thing for the government or the Constitution or the actual brick and mortar of the fucking government, but I mean the people of the country might benefit more from more localized government.
I'm a bigger proponent of state power than federal power because look, if we let the states decide, then no matter what you believe, you can pretty much find a state that serves your interests. Say you're pro-choice, right? It is feasible that at some point, if everything's federal law, if the federal government overrides everything, it is feasible to believe that at some point abortion could be illegalized. Right?
Yeah.
And if that's the case and you're pro-choice, then you would prefer a system where there are some states that don't allow it and there's some states that do allow it. And you don't have to live in the states that don't allow it. In fact, not only do you not have to live there, but you could live there and just drive to another state and get your abortion. Gay marriage, same thing. Maybe there will be states where they're not okay with gay marriage. Okay, drive to fucking New York and get married there. And if Oklahoma won't accept that dog, I'm going to beat him. If Oklahoma won't accept your marriage certificate, don't live in Oklahoma.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of philosophical questions here that are hard to just answer because, we talk about like the Confederacy and their ends, and we talk about how they were unjust. From their perspective, in some ways, though, it was just about state rights. And I think, of course, everybody now in hindsight realizes they were wrong because it was states' rights for the ends of maintaining slavery. But some of the ends that we're talking about now, like gay marriage, like abortion, they're not on the scale of slavery, but they're pretty unjust in their own fashion. There's, I don't know how much power do we want the federal government to have is really the question. And it's weird because the left and the right both advocate for the federal government, the government generally, to have a lot of power. Like, there's no small government party.
No.
That doesn't exist.
Yep.
The left wants smaller military, smaller police force, like smaller that stuff,
Right.
and larger, let's just call it welfare state, so that we can appease maybe some of the Republican viewers. And the
wants
right
more military
wants a
and-
police state
Yep.
and more militarization, and want essentially no social systems if they can get by, with that. Nobody on the political spectrum, except for libertarians who don't really have a presence, is actually advocating for minimal government.
And even in the libertarian movement, there are like so many varying degrees. You have some that are straight up anarchists. I've heard so-called libertarians say stuff like, "Well, we don't need a fire department. We don't need a police department." It's like, we don't. I know as cavemen we didn't have those things, but I think life back then sucked.
It was worse.
I mean,
Well, even in the Gilded Age,
yeah,
we didn't have those things, and it was worse. Like, this is a cheesy ass example, but in New York City, and one of what's that movie, Gangs of New York?
yeah,
They have all the different fire departments that are all private.
right.
That's actually like a take from history
Mm-hmm.
when there were private fire departments,
Right.
and when a fire would happen, they would fight each other,
Right.
and whoever would end up putting out the fire would charge a fee to the person,
Right.
or try and take something, or they would while they're putting out the fire, they would loot the house that they're
Right.
putting out the fire,
Right, and if some poor guy's house is burning down,
Let it burn,
There's no
right.
incentive to.
Right.
Yeah,
As long as it doesn't affect the whole neighborhood, let it burn. Yeah.
I mean, we're either gonna be a society that takes care of each other, or everything's just gonna fall to shit. Literally, like chaos is gonna reign supreme. And if I understand, like at certain points of history, governments take too much power. Right now, our government has way too much power with the surveillance state and the NSA, and I understand terrorism and all this, but dude, they're spying on American citizens daily. You're getting mad about wearing a mask in Walmart. You do realize that dick pic you sent 2 years ago, NSA people have that, and maybe they looked at it then. Maybe they'll look at it in 10 years when they're trying to dig up dirt on you.
Yeah.
Like people are getting weird about the wrong things, and a lot of it comes down to ignorance. Most people, you've heard of the Patriot Act. Most people don't understand what the Patriot Act was. And no one, I mean, some people, but no one knows what the NDAA is.
Right.
No one ever talks about the NDAA. Even these right-wing, like libertarian so-called wannabes, they never bring up the NDAA. I've never seen Tim Pool bring up the National Defense Authorization Act.
Right.
Well,
and a lot of people acted like when Trump got elected, he was going to... and to be fair, a lot of liberals acted like when Obama got elected, he would repeal the Patriot Act.
Right.
Because I think the Patriot Act was passed in 2003.
Yeah, not long after September 11th.
But, so in 2008, when Obama's elected, there were a lot of progressive liberals who expected the Patriot Act to be repealed.
Yep.
And he didn't do it. In fact, in 2011, he passed the
doubled
NDA,
down on it, yeah.
which doubled down and potentially restricted habeas corpus. Though I don't know I don't know that at least I've ever seen an example of that actually happening. But then again, who knows if it would make it into the media if that kind of thing did happen.
And that's the thing. I mean, I don't think that your average American is... There's provisions in the NDAA for, like you said, suspending habeas corpus. They can detain American citizens for whatever reason. They don't have to try them. There's no rules about it. Now, I'm not one of those conspiracy guys that thinks normal everyday citizens are being detained, right?
No.
I don't think that's happening. But just the fact that they saw it fit to pass a law that enables that sort of activity is disturbing. And the fact that people get so up in arms about a mask or about a concert being canceled or about their favorite bar being closed, and they don't even know what the NDAA is. It's like, you're ignorant.
Well, that's it, but it's a lot of it is just like it's more convenient for people to be upset about their favorite restaurant being closed or the fact that they have to wear a mask when they go into the grocery store than it is for them to actually do research about what the NDAA said in 2011.
Right.
And like I was saying, liberals got upset liberals got upset when the Patriot Act was passed and acted like a liberal would come in and overturn it. Before Trump was elected, some Republicans walked around and acted, especially like people from the Tea Party or movement,
Right.
people who were maybe more on the libertarian spectrum, acted like Trump was going to go in there and repeal the Patriot Act and repeal like the the NDAA.
Yep.
None of these motherfuckers are doing it. And coming up in November, we're going to vote for two guys, and both of whom we already know won't do it. You can vote for Trump. The Patriot Act is still going to be there in a year. You can vote for Biden. The Patriot Act is still going to be there in a year.
Yeah.
You know,
they're an extension of that.
It's in a lot of ways it's almost the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
It just comes down to like a preference of like, I don't know what corporate donors you want to be most happy in the whole
Right.
thing.
I'm gonna feed this pup.
Depressing.
It is.
We should talk about some other happy shit, man. Shit.
I have a video up there of, I think it's Japan or China in the early 1900s.
Did you shut off the video?
Oh.
More. A little more.
Sorry about that, guys. I knocked over my phone camera. All right, so yeah, that is all depressing. I did want to say too. What's that guy's name? Nick Cordero, the Broadway guy.
Yeah, just died of coronavirus.
Yeah. So for anyone who's been following, I mean, everyone's heard this story by now. That Broadway star Nick Cordero, the guy that I think he was most recently starring in A Bronx Tale, has passed away. He had his leg amputated at one point. He was in a coma for probably months. He had a young.
He's been awake though for the last few weeks at least,
Has he?
and like conscious, like not able to talk from what I've heard, but able to communicate. I think smile and stuff
Blink.
like that. Yeah, and like look at his family and acknowledge them. It's sad. Sad
It's-
story.
That makes it even sadder that he was awake for a period. They were saying that he might have to have a double lung transplant, and I know that at one point we thought the case fatality rate on COVID was 3 to 5%, which is pretty awfully high.
It's about 1 now, right? That's what they're saying.
It's between 0.5% and 1%, which is still, by the way, 0.5%. I said this the other night, is 10 times higher than seasonal flu, and that's like a especially deadly seasonal flu. But he was 41 years old, no underlying conditions. So take this seriously, guys. Don't go out unnecessarily. When you do go out, wear a mask. Take this seriously. You might be somewhat young and healthy. You might be really young and healthy. You might have no risk whatsoever of getting sick and dying. But think about the people that you interact with. Think about your family. Think about what kind of difference you can make just by being responsible. So rest in peace, Nick Cordero. I've been thinking about that for the last couple days, and it's made me pretty upset, man. He had a young baby, a young wife, just 41 fucking years old. His whole life ahead of him.
You know, I saw something that kind of put it into an interesting perspective if you're kind of nerdy like us and play Dungeons and Dragons. And it was a meme, and it said, you know, you think 2% or 1% is low probability until you roll a D100 and you get the 1
Yeah.
or the 2.
Right.
And you think you have high constitution until you roll a nat 1 when you roll the D20.
Yep.
And that's kind of like what this is like.
Yep.
You know, they don't know that much still about coronavirus and the way it affects certain people. You know, most people are fine when they get coronavirus. So they get really sick, you know, like my girlfriend's aunt and her uncle both had
Right.
coronavirus. Her friend Liz had coronavirus. They all live in Philadelphia, where it's more prevalent than here in New Mexico. They got really sick. Like, you know, from talking to them, they said that they were as sick as, you know, as that they could ever really remember being from a virus or anything like that. But obviously it didn't kill them. They recovered. But that isn't everyone. That isn't the case for everyone.
How old were all of them?
Well, her aunt is almost 60. Right. Her aunt that had coronavirus is the twin sister of her mom. It's almost 60. And I'm not sure her husband is the same age or about the same age. But her friend Liz is 30. So yeah, anyway, you know, those people all were fine. Most people are going to be fine. You know, 99 out of 100 people, maybe more,
Right.
are going to be fine. But that's still a lot of people. You know, there's 330 million people in America. And if 1% of people end up dying from the virus who get it, and everybody gets it, that's well over 1 million people.
Yep.
That's over 3 million people.
Yep.
So, I don't know.
And I don't know. I do think this second wave is going to be worse than the first one. We were talking about that earlier. Just because, you know, a couple months ago, people were more afraid than I feel it myself, man. After living with this for a couple months and it becoming reality, I feel complacency creeping in.
Oh, absolutely.
Even for me. And I truly believe that people need to take this seriously.
Yeah.
So hopefully, you know, we've lost 130,000. Hopefully you're staying safe out there. Obviously, all those protests, you know, George Floyd was murdered, plain and simple. And the city of Minneapolis saw it fit not to charge, I forgot his name, Gavin whatever, with the crime for whatever reason. It, you know, and they caused all that shit. I understand why the protests
They're charging
happened.
him now, though, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Within a day of all the shit going down, they started.
Right.
But it's like you miss the whole point is you're proving them right when someone does that, when someone obviously murders
Right.
a perp, you know, in cold blood out there, and then the city doesn't charge the fucking cop. You're proving
Right.
everything that BLM has been saying, you know. And I've never been a big BLM guy. Obviously, I don't want to see people get shot dead in the street. With that said, I've always been reluctant to look at it as a purely race thing. I think of it more as like police have too much power in this country, and they need to stop shooting poor people. Now there happens to be more black poor people, you know, per capita than other races. So
Which is a systemic problem in
it's a
itself.
systemic problem. It absolutely is. And then when I listened to that Joe Rogan Experience, well, he did 2 episodes with that Baltimore cop. You know, a somewhat young white cop. He spent 12 years in the Baltimore PD, and he doesn't sugarcoat it, man. Like, the drug war is a race war. The drug
Yeah.
war is the government's war against black people, you know.
Well, it's all about, and we talked about this before, but it's all about voting rights.
Well,
You
that's
know,
a part of it.
That's a significant part of it,
Mhm.
because in a lot of these, you know, southern states in particular, you know, I don't know about Maryland, but I know, you know, in Georgia, Alabama, like they have, you know, large populations of African Americans, and you know, a big segment or a big, you know, large amount of those people are not allowed to vote because of a felony that's on their record.
Right.
And oftentimes they had gotten a felony for a crime that a white person would commit and get away with.
Right.
And the example that I had talked to you about was like, when we were younger and we would get busted for pot.
Yeah.
And I just remember the cop always like walking up to our window, knowing we were hotboxing the car.
Yeah.
And just like maybe taking the weed or maybe just telling us to get the fuck out of there.
Yep.
But nothing ever really coming
Nothing
of it.
ever. Not
But
a
you
ticket, not. And by the way, in Nevada at the time, weed was not decriminalized.
No, this was no. And
They could have taken us to jail.
right. And my thought has always been like as an adult, like looking back on that is like had I been a person of color,
Right.
like I could have gotten a felony for drug possession.
And you probably would have.
And that felony for drug possession would then prevent me from voting in every subsequent election for the rest of my life. And that's a good way to like suppress the vote. Another good way to suppress the vote, which is something that's happening, is closing polling places in inner cities, which they're doing. In some of these places, they had huge precincts where there would be like 300 polling places, and now they've dropped it down to 1. And because what they're trying to do is they're trying to stifle the vote in inner cities, and especially in November with the pandemic going on and everything like that, if you're going to vote in one of those places that happens to be a Democratic stronghold, you're going to have to stand in line for 6 hours to do it, surrounded by other fucking people.
Right.
And that's a great way. Like that's a terrible fucking thing to do, but what an incredible way to suppress voters.
Yeah.
Especially during a pandemic when people don't really want to be around other people. There's a lot of ugly shit that's going on. But I think that we should talk about something that's not political for a bit.
Yeah.
Just for the sake of joy and drinking Bud Light and having fun. You get enough of it when you watch the news, and I'm sure somebody's listening, they're tired of hearing it too, because the shit sucks no matter where you hear it.
God, he's so needy.
My dog is out of control. If there was boarding school for dogs, send him to a military school. Okay. Yeah, I mean we did talk about a little bit too much politics.
Well, I'm not complaining. It brings, honestly, now when I talk about it, it brings me down. It's not like the happiest thing to talk about, because there's a lot of just really depressing stuff. And I know that it's important. Like I wouldn't say, oh, we shouldn't talk about it, denying that it's important. But I do feel like at this point, if you haven't already made up your mind how you're going to vote in November, like what the fuck could possibly happen between now and then that would help?
Nothing. No,
Like if you're, how could anybody be on the fence? Like,
and I didn't think anyone was on the fence before, but I do think that there's a large segment of young people that would vote against Trump that needed to be energized. And I think the Black Lives Matter thing energized a certain segment of that group.
well, that's it.
And
Yeah.
I think that I honestly do think Trump's I mean I thought Trump was going to lose in 2016. I didn't think
What drives me crazy that all the, like, when you look at all the news media stuff, all those people are sitting around like saying, look how far back Trump is in the polls.
Yeah.
And it's a serious deja vu. It's
Right.
like they sat around saying this shit in 2016.
Right.
And all that did was serve to stifle the vote.
Right.
Because a lot of people who were not really excited about Hillary Clinton then just thought it wouldn't matter if they didn't show up or not.
Yep.
And
It has the opposite effect that you would want, because it, like
Right.
you said, it'll make Democrats stay home, and it'll fire up Trump fans even more
Yeah.
to spread the word.
Yeah, and then if Trump does happen to win in 2020, which he might, like, to me, up until like a month ago, I was 100% sure Trump was going to win again. Not because I liked the guy, but because the economy was doing pretty well a few months ago, and he was going to be able to ride on that, which is usually a good thing for a president to ride on.
Right.
But anyway, I don't know. There's so much to talk about with good old Trumpy.
Do you know who Chris D'Elia is?
No.
You've never heard of Chris D'Elia? So he's a comedian. He's like in the Joe Rogan circuit, and he's like friends with all those guys. He got Me Too'd recently. Apparently he was texting some 16, 17-year-old girls.
Well, you don't do that. It's not something you should do.
But there's a there's a video from one of the podcasts that he was a guest on, and where they're talking about basically what got him caught, which was like people taking screenshots of Snapchat conversations, and you like see the wheels turning in his brain. You see it. So now Chris D'Elia is pretty he's pretty famous at this point. Especially if you're a YouTube person.
The 7th time and I've ignored it.
It's just a strong core.
This is Chris D'Elia.
But hold on a second. How did it come out? Like, how did they
The
Parents.
boy's mother ended up finding it.
Fucking
finding it? What do you mean?
haters.
Snapchat goes away, right? How they?
He probably saved it. You can screen record, take screenshots.
You gotta know that that's gonna happen. Some people do some crazy shit.
Yeah, he saved the screen he found the photos up on his phone, which he saved from Snapchat. Also, Mom, quit being a cockblock.
So yeah, he got Me Too'd pretty hard, and all of his friends, all of his comedian friends, those two guys he was talking to there, Joe Rogan, all of them have like distanced themselves and deleted episodes with him, and so
Well, I mean,
rest in peace, Chris D'Elia.
well, there's nothing that needs to be said about that,
He was like texting. They said he was grooming like 16 and 17-year-old girls, like talking to them until they were old enough to bang. But it's
Jesus Christ.
yeah, and a lot of chicks have come forward. The funny thing is, so I deleted my Twitter maybe 2 months ago because I was following Chris D'Elia because he is funny, regardless of whatever he's been doing. He is funny, and I got sick of all these goddamn thoughts, all these goddamn hoes, these Twitter hoes, messaging him pathetic shit. Like, they would message him stuff like, not message, but, well, so everyone could see it. I don't know what that's called. Not a DM, but I guess a message.
They're just at him.
Saying stuff like, I want to have your babies, and, like, please, just, like, begging him for whatever sort of attention they could get. And he would like them. He would like those kind of messages, those kind of tweets. And I was like, oh, that's gross. So I said, this is pathetic on one of them. And all these other fucking cunts came out of the woodwork and started attacking me. And I was like, I'm done. I'm done with Twitter. Fuck this shit. And then it comes out a couple months later. And now that I think back on it, a bunch of those girls were probably underage. Like...
You know what that makes me think of? Do you remember the whole John Cruz incident?
Yes, that debate guy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Did you ever hear what happened to that guy?
You said something. He got in trouble
He's
for
like
being a chomo.
Yeah, he's in fucking prison, dude. Like life sentence, done. Because, well, I guess I should give your followers the rundown. So when I was in high school, I did the debate circuit. Pretty nerdy thing to do, but that was what I did, and I debate. We're from Nevada, and this guy was a coach at the Bronx School of Science, but he also ran one of the debate camps that I went to. The debate camp that I went to over the summer in between the years.
Right.
And anyway, so I kind of got to know him. His name was John Cruz, and he was a debate coach at the Bronx School of Science.
Mm-hmm.
And he had always been real nice to me and all this stuff. And not ever super weird, but like very helpful. Like, you remember we went to the Bronx tournament. I don't know if you remember meeting him there.
Yeah,
I'm sure you do remember that.
Yeah. Just a helpful gay guy.
Very helpful gay guy, which was it was okay. so yeah, I had been to the Bronx tournament twice when I was in high school. I had met him over debate camp a few times. I had seen him around the circuit at different places. He always been very nice to me. Anyway, when I graduated high school and was no longer a debater, but occasionally would still judge tournaments, it was my first year out. He started emailing me, and we were going back and forth emailing. And basically, this guy wanted to be like my sugar daddy. Like, he basically was telling me that he would give me money every month as long as he could fly me out to New York, and I would spend time with him there. It's so selling my butthole for for a lifestyle,
Ugh.
Now, I never thought really twice about it. I always was not really into it, despite how poor I was when I was 18 years old and living in California, not really doing so well. But it ended up coming out that this guy had not just been coming at me, but coming at a lot of kids and coming at younger kids. And if you look him up on the internet, John Cruz, debate coach, you'll find it, dude. It pulls up immediately that now he's doing time in prison for whatever he did with other kids. John doesn't have an H, by the way, and Cruz is Cruz. There's nothing else to it. Anyway, but that's actually my second incident of having a weirdo try and get me when I was a kid.
Really?
Yeah, well, you know the other one too, Mr. Rogers, man.
Oh yeah, yep.
So I came close twice to having my butthole surrender to the
The
Dark
thing
Lord.
about Mr. Rogers, so our dad. So Cody, my brother Cody, had this teacher in fourth grade
yeah,
named
my
Mr.
fourth grade
Rogers.
teacher.
How fitting that his name was Mr. Rogers. And he was, we didn't know it at the time, but he was a creep. And he invited you and some of your classmates to a hike.
But it's important to note that he was at the time, to me, he was the coolest fucking teacher
Right.
ever.
Right.
We all, maybe
That's
me
how
more than
that's
others.
how the chomos get you.
Right, I guess. But this guy was the coolest guy. He coached soccer on the weekends, and he was a kayak guide down the Colorado River right on the other side of Hoover Dam, and was a backpacker and an outdoorsman, and he was our fourth grade teacher. But we had this kind of weird elementary school where there was a mine in the back. It's a long story, but he ran that whole project and was involved in all this stuff.
Now, do you think at any point he took any students into the mine?
I don't.
Do you think that's why he wanted to be the
Well,
mine
dude,
operator?
he was a sick son of a bitch. Whenever they found him out, man, he was a sick son of a bitch. And when they eventually found him out, here's the worst part of this: he had a kid who he had adopted. This,
I remember
this
the kid
boy.
was at
He
the
was
hike.
our age, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was at the hike.
Yep.
And I don't know if he had adopted him or if he was just his foster son or
Right.
something like that. But he had been using that kid to make child pornography with other kids. And that's what they got Mr. Rogers for. When they ended up getting him, they got him on fucking some real heavy stuff, man. Not good. He's dead now, which is fucking good.
Really?
Because the world doesn't need that son of a bitch. He died in prison a few years ago.
He probably got murdered.
That's all on the internet, too.
He
that
probably
you can
got
find.
murdered once they found
No,
out.
he had health conditions. He had
Oh.
I don't remember. He was on dialysis or some shit. He had some weird health conditions.
I wonder if his story is.
Oh, it's
online.
all over the internet.
What
I've
was
looked
his
it up
first
recently.
name?
Rick Rogers. Just for the internet. Y'all can look this shit up too, man. This guy was my fourth grade teacher and he was a fucking creep. Rogers, no D. And if you just look up Rick Rogers, Las Vegas, it'll pop right up.
Campus Times?
No. I think if you put up Las Vegas, Nevada. Anyway. There.
Is that him?
That's
That
in
is
there.
him.
Yeah.
And he's dead now.
Well, no. So there's news stories that you can find. So you spell. I don't know.
I
if
know.
It's,
Yeah, Las Vegas.
da, 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 da.
All right, let's spell it right. Las.
You might need to put in
Vegas.
teacher or But there was news stories that should come up. Go to all. Go back to all. Yeah, there it is. Child sex offender dies in Nevada prison. Was teacher, coach. Anyway.
Looks terrible there. 55-year-old former Nevada middle school teacher, youth soccer coach, foster parent, and part-time police officer. Did you know he was a part-time police officer?
I don't really remember that from when I was a kid. I remember he had done he was in the military. He had been in the military, maybe just like the National Guard or something.
Has died in prison while serving 60 years to life in a child sexual assault case that stunned his hometown of Boulder City near Las Vegas. Yep. So now Cody, this was Cody's 4th grade teacher. He invited Cody and some of Cody's classmates on this hike, this Hoover Dam hike, which looking back, we'll get to why I think this was weird, but looking back, like I wonder what his plan for that whole hike was. But luckily, my dad, I went, which wouldn't have mattered probably. I was, I don't know, 13. He probably could have raped me too. But luckily my dad went, so nothing happened. But it is weird to think that while we were hiking down that thing,
2 naked guys
there
who
was
were down there.
There was 2 naked guys, I think, butt fucking in one of the hot springs. So, like, was that a known gay?
I don't know.
Like,
I don't know
was that
about
a-
any of that. I'm very thankful, though, that my dad had a hunch that it wasn't good and decided to go, because I could have been deflowered on that day.
Yeah, I mean that we both could have been, and then my dad would have had to kill him.
So yeah. Anyway, we've gone now through both of my stories of so as a youth somehow dodging creeps.
Well, let's read about the more recent of the 2, John
Look at
Cruise.
his fucking face, dude.
Oh,
What a
New
creeper.
York Times. I'm not paying you for news stories with the internet. You know what drives me nuts? I understand that New York Times is used to people having to pay, but with the internet, like, you have to change your business model. You have to, because people can get news anywhere. CNN.com doesn't charge you, you know.
CNN kind of sucks compared to the New York Times.
I agree. I agree, but like, don't you think this is a little much, expecting people to pay to read?
Yeah,
a
I mean,
news
I definitely,
article?
I don't know, I definitely don't want to pay. We
So-
can find another. Let's see if we can find another news article which explains exactly what this dude got busted for. I wish I still had my old email account. Like, we could pull up the creepy emails that this dude sent to me.
Why wouldn't you have your old email?
Well, I haven't had it for years.
You just stopped using it, and I don't think you can delete those.
No, it probably still exists, but I don't remember the password for it. I think I had tried to get into it. It was a Yahoo account back when that was a thing.
So this headline says, debate coaches shocked by Bronx science teachers bust on kiddie porn charges.
That headline's a little tricky too. Bronx science teachers bust on
Yeah.
kiddie.
They know what they're doing. Look at the picture, the good and fruity. Whatever, this Daily News knows exactly what they're doing.
That's some salacious shit, dude.
I mean, that is pretty funny. So did he get a good and plenty? Because that's not, or good and fruity, is that a real thing?
Well, he was very obviously gay and would flaunt
Right.
it. Not that that's that's great. The
That's
child
fine,
porn
yeah.
stuff is not what's
that's
good.
not, yeah.
So this picture is probably something he did out of comedy, and then they picked it up like, woo, perfect.
The Bronx High School of Science teacher, the Bronx High School, that's a weird word, or a weird sentence. High School of Science teacher arrested Friday on child porn charges was the talk of a citywide debate competition on Saturday. So now this is interesting because, Cody said he did debate. The one time I met this guy was when you did the Bronx tournament. And I went out there to help judge, even though I didn't even know how to debate myself, so it was kind of weird, but it was a fun experience.
That's where you started smoking cigarettes,
That's
isn't
when I
it?
started smoking cigarettes.
That's
I thought
my fault too. I'm going to
it's-
take the blame for that.
it is partially your fault. It's also partially that three-piece suit's fault, Because I'm not gonna lie, dude. When you're wearing a 3-piece suit and you got a stogie, and you're standing in the Bronx, you feel like a fucking gangster.
Well, we had both been smoking hookah for a long time before that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the thing about hookah is we always I remember us selling mom on it. Not selling mom on it, but trying to talk her out of being so
Not the
pissed off
same,
about us.
yeah.
Exactly. They're not the same. It's not addictive, which is bullshit.
Complete bullshit.
There is fucking nicotine in fucking hashish.
I used to
Like, you
fiend
wouldn't
for
believe.
hookah, dude.
Yeah. Well, and then once you figure when we would smoke hookah, eventually we figured out that you could just smoke a portable cigarette.
Yeah.
That
And
did the
get that
same fucking thing.
Same buzz.
And that was it. That was the
Yep.
end. Yeah.
Yeah,
Man, what a terrible thing.
Hookah was the ultimate gateway. But yeah, that's where I started smoking. That's where I met this guy. Now, I'd be lying if I told you guys that I didn't think this guy was a little creepy. But at the same time, you were already 17.
Yeah, it was
Probably.
my senior year. I was 17. Yeah.
And you were bigger than this. I mean, this guy wasn't raping you. he might have tried to,
He wanted to pay me up for it, though.
yeah, I mean, he might have, and that's whatever. But he
If I
wasn't
was a
raping
lesser
you.
man, I would have accepted.
So where did I? What did I read up to? People are talking about it. One debate coach who declined to be named said of Cruz, "People are surprised." I don't know if I'd be that surprised. You know, maybe I had more of an insight into this guy because I knew he was talking to you behind the scenes and stuff. I didn't know he was talking to you like that, but I knew that he was. You can kind of tell, what are you doing, dude? Are you a debate coach or are you trying to be a teenager? Why are you Facebook messaging people or MySpace maybe at the time? People that are kids.
Well, that's the thing, and that's the thing that this dude and Mr. Rogers have in common, is that they both put themselves in positions
Right.
where they were around their fucking prey,
Right.
basically all the time.
And
which
that's what they do.
Which is the first sign. I'm not saying every dude who's a fucking teacher is a creep,
no.
but
But creeps, if a creep has a thing for kids, he's gonna try to be around kids, whether
Right.
that's being a Boy Scout
and that's
master,
what right.
being a priest, and being a teacher, being a debate coach, teacher.
You know what's crazy is I it's so funny the passage of time. But this guy, when he got busted, was only 32. That's what this article
Wow.
says. He's
He's
32.
our age.
Yeah,
Whoa.
right.
That is because he seems even looking at that picture, he looks like an older guy.
Well, that's the weird thing is that it's not going to be long, Cam. We're going to be 40.
Dude, I have a shit ton of gray hair already.
Yeah, it's come in a little on the sides for me.
Yep, I have it in the sides. I have it in my beard.
Yeah.
But I'm not gonna lie, the gray, I don't know how women feel about it. I don't even care. I like it. I look in the mirror and I'm like, yeah. It really does make you feel distinguished. I might have to get some gray hair dye and just start dyeing the rest of it.
You get Just for Men. Were you around when I Just for Men my beard?
No. Would you make it black?
Yeah, it did not look good. So this is back in the Vegas era,
Yeah.
but I still lived out there when I was wearing fake glasses sometimes. I was really working on my different looks, by the way.
So you just for men to
So
be-
I don't know if it's coming through for anybody watching. I have a pretty blonde beard,
right.
and it always annoyed me. So I went and got Just for Men and blackened my beard. Which was not one of the best options I've ever.
It seems like you would have to at least do your hair at the same time, otherwise the contrast would just be like, what the?
Many attempts I have made in my life to be cool. Many
Yeah.
have failed.
You know what? You know what's annoying for me? So, I have long hair, and in a lot of situations, I put it up because it gets in my face and shit. Well, there was that man bun thing for a while, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like,
You were riding the man bun wave.
that's how people would act. But here's the thing: this, I never had. This is not a man bun. This is just long hair. A man bun is a specific thing where
Right.
they have the top knot and the sides are shorter. That's never the look I was going for. I just can't have hair in my face while I cook, you know?
That's probably what the guys with the man buns say.
It didn't help that I had a beard too. I was like crossing off all the check
I
marks
know.
of. You know what haircut I hate? The I call it the coif. I don't know what it's called. I call
Oh,
it the coif.
real long on the top,
Yes.
like the basic Richard Spencer look.
I don't know who Richard Spencer is.
He's a fucking like white supremacist Nazi motherfucker. It's a
It's-
Nazi look.
It's it is a Nazi
Yeah,
look, and
yeah.
I hate it. And it's like the in thing. It's been like the in thing for like 5 years now.
Well, I'm happy that flannel shirts aren't really the in thing anymore because I've worn flannel shirts since for 15 years. And when that was the in thing, when there was a real it pretty much is the same time as the man bun thing.
Right.
Hipsters were popular or whatever.
Right.
And I had a beard because I've kind of had a beard now for 6 or 7 years. People would always act like I was a hipster because I was wearing flannel shirts. I wear a flannel shirt
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah, that's the
You
worst.
know?
When the in thing becomes something that you always wear, and then people are like, "What a poser!" It's like, no.
Well, I'm happy that it's moved past that now. I can wear my flannel shirts and be
You-
in peace.
Let me tell you, you see, and a lot of it's because kids play Grand Theft Auto. Like, I'm probably the oldest guy on there. People have asked me too, like, "How old are you?" And I'm like, 31. And they're like, "I knew you were old." And I'm like,
What does that mean?
what does that mean? Like, what? Because I'm not like, "What's up, boy?"
What's up, boy?
But anyway, yeah. So apparently I stick out like a sore thumb. But you see the way these kids dress, like the way they'll dress their character, and they look like Pete Davidson on a red carpet, like a big, like gaudy jacket,
Yeah.
you know, and like
Or
tight,
some sort of
skinny
raver or
jeans.
something like
yeah,
that.
and it's like
Yeah.
they're all like trying to be cool. They're all like kids. Meanwhile, I'm like in a leather jacket. And I'm like, "Fuck you, fag!" Like, oh, you little shits.
I can't believe you're still playing GTA.
Oh, why can't you believe it? What's so?
I don't know. To me, you got like a machine that's capable of processing any game,
Yeah.
and GTA is the game.
You know, at this point, I would get something else, but I'm afraid to buy something else. I'm afraid to spend my money on stuff that,
Just because the money's not coming in anymore right now?
yeah, I mean,
Is
you
that,
know,
yeah.
this?
Well, that's
I'm-
legitimate.
Yeah, and I'm not going to be able to live here for very long, so I got to figure out what my.
We'll have to talk about all that, but maybe not on this.
Oh, I don't care. If someone listens to my show, and they get this deep in it, they're privy to all my secrets.
Fair enough.
You've earned it at this point, baby.
What are you thinking about doing? Where are you going to move?
Me and Mom were there's a house we were looking at, but my payments would be like $600 a month.
But to live in a house?
It's a single wide. It's like a trailer.
Where?
I think the address said Cerrillos. I don't know exactly where though. So, you know, I'm sure it's kind of beat down. It's 80,000.
Oh, to buy? I'm trying
Yeah.
to think of where.
And the payments, she said she thinks the payments would be 500 or 600, which is, I mean, that is kind of steep. But you know, I can't stay here. I can't be off grid. It's not off grid because I don't think being off grid I'd be able to have my fish tanks or my amps or
No.
you know.
I mean, I don't know, but a lot of those are it's not the tanks, it's the lamps, right?
well, not even the
And the
lamps, probably
pumps.
the pumps.
But the lamps are heat lamps, aren't they?
Only that one is. So that
Those things use
yeah.
ginormous amount of electricity.
Right. So, and then the amps. I mean, amps, I've told you this, amps are notorious for using, a lot of people have to put those surge protectors on whatever they're plugging their amp into because amps fucking use a lot, you know. So I don't know.
Off grid is romantic, but it's hard.
The thing, it just doesn't seem feasible. I mean, she was like sending me pictures of buses that have been converted. And okay, so say I did that and I stopped playing electric guitar and just play acoustic guitar and blah, 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 blah. I couldn't do this. I wouldn't have room to set up my mics and have, do any sort of show. I mean, this is like the bare minimum right here. Like, go any smaller and I can't do this. And yeah. So, but if I have a $500 or $600 payment, I'm gonna have to fucking go out there and find a job.
Terrible times, dark tidings.
Unless I create a Patreon and you guys start supporting me. Please. All right, so let me make sure. I did want to watch this. It has nothing to do with anything we've been talking about, but Dig.com has a lot of really interesting stuff on it. About 100 years ago in Tokyo. It's crazy to think that, like, those little kids, I mean, if they were alive, they'd be over 100,
They were fucking fighting us on Iwo Jima, bro.
Yeah, that's...
Oh, it's just the passage of time, man. It's really a
nuts.
trip.
It's insane.
It's weird to think about, though, because I don't know. And maybe this is just like kind of some hippy dippy shit, but for me, I have a hard time like recollecting the moment that I became conscious.
Right.
Of course, like I don't know that anyone could recollect the moment that they became conscious.
Right.
And it almost feels like an endless stream. Like sometimes, do you feel like, this is a weird thing, but do you ever feel like when you're learning about history or when you're reading history or something,
That
you
were
almost
there.
feel like you were present? You
And
feel like that?
I was thinking about that the other day, like who knows if it's just because you learn about it and you hear about history and know about history for so long that you just feel like that's what it was. But I do feel like that, not so much with like ancient shit, more so with like the things that have happened within our parents' and our grandparents' lifetime. I feel like I've experienced those things, like the 50s, like the 50 diner scene.
Yeah, I feel it with even like ancient history, but obviously it's some hippy dippy stuff. I even think that there's kind of a biological explanation for it,
Like memories getting passed down in
Well,
DNA?
it's not.
or-
I don't think it's actual memory. Though there is an argument for that. But the first thing, we're just an endless division of cells.
Right.
Even the original zygote,
Right.
which we sprung from, was a single cell that was formed from two haploids, one from the mother, one from the father, and so. Every cell in our body is just a descendant of a cell in someone else's body, which is a descendant of a cell in somebody else's body, all the way down the line. Like,
right.
so far down the line, in fact, that it's way further than just our species.
Right.
Way,
Right.
like, we're talking like 3 billion years of on
It's a
down the
single
fucking
cell,
line
yep,
at this
yep.
point. As far as we can trace the line biologically at this point. So there's something to be said for like, not the cells that I'm living in having presence in those times. But there's also, you could also think about it and think like, well, the cells that are in my body now are not the cells that were in my body when I was 5.
Right. Right.
And I have memories of those events.
Right.
And so there's a lot of like interesting takes on it, but also, and I'm forgetting the word now. Oh boy. As a bio major, this is a terrible thing to forget right now.
Describe it, maybe, Ike.
Well, like, So the classic example that they've proven in laboratories is with rats. When a rat is pregnant, or a mouse is pregnant, or whatever animal, but usually this kind of testing happens with rats. The initial test did for sure. They would change its diet so that the rat would have like a really high sugar diet.
Uh-huh.
And then the offspring, and then when the rat was born, before the rat was born, they would change it back. But then that offspring, for the rest of its life, even though it was just in the mother's body, would carry like a memory of that, and it would
Is that
process sugar.
epigenetics?
Epigenetics, that's
Yeah.
it. It would process sugar differently
Right.
than other rats.
Right.
And it was just based on how much sugar was available in the females in the mother's diet
Right.
when it was in utero.
Right.
And so there is kind of the argument for epigenetics, like passing down some
Yep.
memory, not into the way it is the way the cells function, but it's what's happening is it's in the way the DNA is being transcribed, because different proteins are made available to perform basically different functions.
Right.
And
So an interesting question would be, because when you look at evolution and you're talking about natural selection, you're talking about random mutations that are taking place at a genetic level, and the ones that are working staying because of natural selection, and the ones that aren't working not staying because of natural selection. But it does make you wonder if there is epigenetics, and if there is some sort of almost not blueprint, but almost like a blueprint moving forward from generation to generation, where your DNA can literally say, the environment's like this, we need to change in this way. The environment's like this, we need to change in this way. It does make you wonder if there's more to evolution than we thought. If it's more than just a random happening that's going on with genetics, and more of a life is finding a way to evolve to fit the world.
well, the answer's in the mechanisms. Like, for instance, those sugars that would be available would also be available as inhibitors, or as basically they would make the DNA in certain parts be easier to be transcribed or more difficult to be transcribed. And then therefore the sugar itself, the presence of the sugar, would change the way that the DNA is transcribed. And that's the like kind of weird thing about DNA, is like it is a blueprint.
Uh-huh.
But imagine if you had a blueprint for a house and only 4% of it was the house,
Right.
and 95 to 96%
Was
of it
junk.
was other stuff.
Yeah.
And for a long time they called it junk. They
Right.
said like, this is junk. But then they started to figure out that not all of the DNA was being transcribed into protein, or transcribed into a messenger RNA that would eventually be translated into protein. A lot of that DNA was being transcribed into messenger RNAs or tRNAs that would in themselves function in some way.
Right.
That
So
would
it's-
never become a protein, but that would do something on their own.
Right. So it's not useless. It's just we didn't understand what
Right.
it was doing. Yeah.
And so when scientists figured out not only the genetic code, but also the transcription code, like if you have a protein with this sequence of amino acids,
Right.
what would that look like in the genetic code? And how could we then find that when we're looking at our DNA? They were only finding, 4% of the genetic code, or whatever the small percentage is. Sorry, it's been a while since I've been in school. But they would only find like certain parts of the DNA that were being transcribed into proteins, and then they immediately thought everything else was useless. But that's because they were only looking at proteins and working backward from there.
Right.
And then they started to figure out that a lot of the DNA is also producing other products that had a function.
Right.
Messenger RNAs that could actually, in some cases, that could attach to the protein that would then translate RNA
Mm-hmm.
and prevent it from translating certain kinds of RNA.
Mm.
So it would inhibit the production of other proteins.
Right.
Or in some cases, it would enhance the production of some proteins. So you have all these different mechanisms going on, and then so DNA is pretty interesting, and a lot of our DNA is viral DNA. Like
Right.
a lot of our DNA what's in us is not, junk DNA, but it's in there because at some point in our lineage,
Right.
Going back millions of years, maybe, even billions of years potentially, a virus entered whatever our body looked like at that time, whatever organism we were, and implanted its DNA into our DNA so that it could start functioning.
Right.
Reproduction, basically.
Well, and after this COVID thing, I always kind of thought of viruses as almost like bacteria, like little living organisms.
They're not alive.
They're not. And
No.
now after this COVID thing, I learned a little bit more about viruses. They're weird. It's like random programming that's just out there. Like almost like a computer virus. I guess that's why it's called a virus. Like a computer virus that's just randomly floating around and can affect your programming.
Very interesting. And I said not living, but it kind of depends on what definition.
Some people, yeah.
That you
The
end up.
fact that it needs a host cell, though.
It doesn't have all of its own machinery
Right.
to survive, which is the argument against it being living. But it's it's one of those things that it's hard to draw a bright line and classify
Right.
these things.
Because it's not an inanimate.
No, it's
You know?
persisting.
Yeah, and it has DNA.
Right.
It
It has right.
So it does depend on. But when you think about it that way, that it's just like these random strings of code that are floating around, and that code could get inside you and fuck up your code. It's interesting.
Oh,
you
it's
know?
really interesting. Yeah, I mean, do you feel like this pandemic is going to result in a lot more people trying to become doctors? Like, just because it's forcing everyone to kind of be more cognizant of some of these things.
I think more people will. Well, it's like, okay, 9/11. How many people do you think signed up for the Marines and the Army
A lot after 9/11.
that
I
wouldn't
think.
have if nothing
Right.
had happened? I don't know what the increase is. I don't know how you track that. That would be tough because even in hindsight, people's opinions, they're not even necessarily lying, but their opinions on why they did something could change, but I do think that you'll have a similar effect that when humanity's confronted by an issue, it's like I said, I never knew anything about viruses. I don't plan on being a doctor. But human beings in general, when we're confronted with something, we become curious about it.
Right.
And I learned way more about viruses in the last 4 months than I ever knew in my whole life, and I hate to say it was out of necessity because there's nothing that I'm doing
It's
with
curiosity.
that, but it's curiosity,
Yeah.
So I do think that there will be more doctors, but I also think that there's going to be the idea that and I think we thought this for a long time because for the last 100 years there hasn't been. I know there was polio and there have been small there was AIDS and there have been small outbreaks of different things, but there hasn't been anything like this. That really threatened the whole world for a period of time. And I don't think with the way society's going, with overpopulation picking up, I don't think that these occurrences are going to become more rare. I think they're going to become more common.
More frequent.
And part of the problem with COVID, part of the thing that a lot of people didn't understand or they just ignored it altogether is when you let a virus like this coronavirus become this common, when you let it infect this many people, the odds of it mutating into something worse go up substantially because there's so many incidents of it out there.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And a lot of people don't even consider that. You just look at the stats at where they're at now and you think, oh, this is what the virus is.
Right.
The problem with that is viruses can change.
Oh, yeah.
And if a good percentage of the world, I mean, if we're looking at billions of people that end up having this virus in them at some point, that is a ton of instances of this virus on an individual level. And the odds of any one of those mutating into something that's substantially more deadly goes through the roof.
Right.
Well,
that's the thing is that you have to think about each instance of the virus as its own strain.
Right.
Because once it's at the point where it's in a person
It can
and it's isolated, that person's going to affect other people, and it's almost like its own lineage, its own trajectory of that virus.
Yep.
It's just like when the virus was, I was reading about this like a month or so ago, but scientists were able to look at people and to test them for coronavirus, and if they tested positive, they were able to take their antibodies, and then they were able to study further to see what strain they were getting, whether or not it had come from Italy, whether or not
Or
it had come
China.
directly from Wuhan,
Right.
like basically where,
Right.
which says a lot about how quickly these viruses mutate
Yeah,
very quickly.
very quickly.
In a human being, or really any other like pretty advanced animal, like, organism,
Right.
DNA mutates
Mm-hmm.
pretty rapidly,
Mhm.
but not on that kind of scale. We
Right.
have a lot of checks in place in our bodies which prevent rapid mutation of DNA because, if our DNA mutated rapidly, we wouldn't persist as a
No.
species. We
No.
wouldn't do very well.
Nope.
But these viruses, like, they don't have they're simple mechanisms.
And
you know?
it benefits them to have that variability, because when they do spread out like this, now they have all their eggs aren't in one basket.
Right.
They're like, oh, we're going to try this out over here. We're going to try this out over here.
Well, it's the reason why you can get the flu year after year after year after year,
Mhm.
because
Yep.
the strain changes so much just
Right.
in a single season.
Right. Yeah, and I don't know, when you're looking at viruses like polio never became a strain that was outside of our vaccine, right? I'm sure certain viruses, like maybe the flu, has something about its makeup that makes it mutate more than other viruses. I've never heard of HIV mutating, for instance. And that's all well and good. But we know coronavirus is mutating like crazy. But we know that the strain that was in New York that came from Italy was deadlier than the strain that was on the West Coast that came from China.
Right.
We know that. And we also know that in order for this to become a thing from the get-go, this was a virus that was inside a bat or a pangolin or some sort of animal, and it mutated enough to jump to humans.
Right.
So we know that it's mutating. The thing to keep into consideration is maybe most of those mutations won't be much, Maybe some of those mutations will be beneficial for us. Sure.
Absolutely.
But it only takes one of those mutations that, let's say it has a transmissibility that's a little bit higher, an incubation rate that's like 20 or 30 days, and it's 20% fatality rate. What would that do to the human species?
Well, it would do a lot, but
And it's not outside of the possibility, because SARS had a confirmed case fatality rate of around it was like 10 to 20%, really high. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that a coronavirus could be that deadly. It's not out of the realm of possibility that a coronavirus could be this transmissible as we see with COVID-19 right now. And that's really what a lot of scientists have been scared of. Like, 3%, which was kind of the peak of what we thought it was, is terrifying. 10 or 20% is beyond terrifying. It would end civilization probably.
yeah. Well, that's the beauty of natural selection, though, is that, we can at least rest assured that what's going to happen going forward is not predetermined in any way, or is not working in any sort of a goal. Like, what's happening is just there's mutations, which
Random.
means changes in the code. You can have a missense mutation or a nonsense mutation, different mutations that completely make the virus ineffective,
Yep.
or it can go the other way. It's harder for it to go the other way. It really is. It's easier for a single chain. It's easier for a single, like, you have adenine, thymine, guanine, and cyanine. It's easy for one of those to get knocked out, and all of a sudden the promoter can't latch to the DNA chain, and the whole thing gets fucked. That's pretty easy to happen.
And
It's harder for it to become more deadly and stuff. But of course, what sticks around is the one that's more deadly and the one
Yeah.
that's more transmissible.
Right.
If you have a missense or a nonsense mutation that knocks out the virus and kills it,
right.
basically prevents it maybe from reproducing or prevents it from multiplying in some way, that's not going to get transmitted. That's just going to be ineffective. It's not going to work. That strain's going to
Exactly.
die.
Yeah, and that is true. I mean, there are a bunch of viruses. I don't know. I've heard that like at any one point in time, you could have a couple viruses and not even know about it.
Sure.
It's pretty. And the best viruses from if you were a virus, if you were designing a virus to survive, the best viruses don't kill their hosts. Obviously, you know, it's a symbiotic relationship. Well, maybe
Or
not
they do like what cholera did. You know,
what did cholera do?
Cholera invades the body and it goes into your stomach and your intestines, and it causes a chain reaction in your. It builds up. It doesn't immediately do this. There's a period of incubation where the virus reproduces and multiplies, and then at a certain point, it causes a reaction in your intestines that makes you have basically like profuse diarrhea, like obscene diarrhea. And in that way, the virus causes you to die from dehydration, but it also escapes your body
And spreads through the diarrhea.
and spreads because, like, it was real bad in England when they had a cholera outbreak, or in France when they would have a cholera out in Paris, like major cities, because these people would have diarrhea and their drinking water wasn't very well separated from their
Right.
sewage water.
So it's spreading through the
So
waste.
people would fucking,
right?
yeah, exactly. And so the way that cholera worked was pretty horrifying, but
Right.
worked pretty well
But it
in terms
worked
of as
for
a
the
virus,
virus,
you
yeah.
know, because it would cause this reaction in your body. Once it had built up enough, you have this massive, like, basically like diarrhea that you can't stop,
Despilation, yeah.
and this reaction that it would cause in your intestines. It would escape your body that way, so it would be transmissible, but it would ultimately wipe out the host. It's pretty
Ooh.
fucking deadly. Imagine being alive in like the 14th century or 15th century in
Oh.
like a place like London, you know.
Fuck that.
Not only is like cholera a thing, but your water is not very well separated from your sewage.
No. Well, that's a big reason why in a lot of places they would drink low alcohol beer
Right.
because it has to be cooked or whatever, and it
Yeah.
kills all the bacteria.
Yeah.
But you know, it was like 0.5% or 1%. It was low enough that like they were giving it to kids in the morning and stuff. You know,
Yeah.
they weren't drinking it to get drunk necessarily.
It was still hydrating them to some degree.
Yeah. That is interesting. But speaking of, you know, the 1400s and back in the day, I've heard the plague. Now, bubonic plague, there's an outbreak every so often. There have been outbreaks in America where homeless camps get the plague, you know, from rat-infested or from flea-infested rats. But in China right now, they're in their wet markets, they're policing what animals are being brought in, what rodents are being brought in, because they have an outbreak of the plague. And it's like, now I don't think the plague is nearly as deadly as it was back then with our modern medicine, but it's still like, guys,
China.
you gotta stop with the wet market shit, dude. Like, what are you guys doing eating rats? That's gross, man.
China.
China needs to knock that shit off.
Well, they're gonna do what they want. They're a fucking country of billions of people.
That's a big part of the problem. India and China have too many goddamn
They have
people.
a fucking ton of people.
They have
But,
too many
I
goddamn
mean,
people.
It's not like we're not on that trajectory. We're just behind them on the same trajectory.
What is the answer for that? Because everyone's always acted like putting a limit on the amount of kids you have is it's like an infringement of your rights.
Well, it
and
raises so many. Well, yeah, exactly. If people are crying tyranny
over
over
mask.
wearing a face mask, imagine if the government says you can only have 2 kids. What
Right.
people are going to say?
and you know,
even if they're saying it for the right reasons,
Right.
You know,
and part of me understands, like, I don't want the government to be telling us how many kids we can have, but what the fuck are we going to do about overpopulation?
it makes me. I saw this. This is so dumb, but this is a few years ago now too. But one of our local right wingers, who espoused a lot of things about like Agenda 21
Yeah.
and like all that whole
Codex
like,
Alimentarius.
line of thinking and all that stuff, and like they're the there's a national like globalist thing that's a cabal is the
Right.
word for it.
Right.
That's gonna start like telling you how many kids you can have, and they're gonna do population control, and like it was all like a part of the FEMA camps.
Yeah.
This was all like part of the same.
The Georgia Guidestones, 500 million.
all part of the same like real stupid.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I saw one of these guys who posted a lot of this stuff. Had posted a meme that was like, overpopulation is a farce. You can fit everybody in the world in Alaska, and they would have like, 10 square feet or whatever they would have. I'm like, dude, do you not realize it's not like about the literal
No.
space that we occupy. It's about the space that all the resources
Yep.
people use occupy, you
Yep.
know. The fact that in order to feed all of these people,
Yep.
you have to have massive farms
Yep.
and the mines and all this different,
it's moronic.
it's a resource argument is what it is.
Yep.
It's not a square footage argument.
No,
It's
no.
not a square footage argument.
Yeah, that's
I was so like irate. Like I want to argue with this person, but I like what the fuck am I even going to say, because there's nothing
it's
I
too
can
much.
say.
It's I have those problems where there's too many things to address. There's
Yeah.
too many things that are wrong with your statement. And your statement is so retarded that I shouldn't even address it anyway.
Right.
It's like anyone that knows anything knows you're wrong. Why
Yeah.
even say anything?
Right.
Yeah, thinking it's just a space issue.
You could fit every person in Alaska in like a certain amount of square footage. I was like, oh no.
Yeah, but maybe that will work. I mean, maybe that would work if we were just eating humans.
And we just eat each other.
We just
That takes care of population control.
But even then, like, that's a lot of humans that have to die.
Have as many babies as you want. Meat's back on the menu, boys.
Oh God. Oh.
No, it's just stupid. It's really bad.
But overpopulation is going to be one of the big problems moving forward.
Oh, of
for
course.
our
Yeah.
planet.
Yep.
You know, I don't like when people say like, "Well, we're going to have to go to a new planet." It's like, and smart people like Elon Musk have talked about that, and it's just not. It's not feasible. Like the amount of work that would take to make something like Mars a livable planet. We could just fix this planet 10 times over.
Yeah.
It's a nice thought that like, well, if things get bad enough here, we could just leave. But like, it's not realistic. We could
Right.
build self-sustaining space stations out there that run on solar power and grow plants and, but what's the limit of those going to be? Like, we have to fix this planet. We have to take care of this planet. This is our home. This is the best bet. There's one terrestrial planetoid in this solar system that can support human life, and we're on it.
Did you see that paper? God, I can't remember the exact amount, but a group of researchers pretty recently, like within the last month, basically through some pretty complicated math and like looking around at the galaxy and stuff, determined like that there would be more than 30 other species, like intelligent species within a certain distance, just based on the
And it
numbers.
was pretty close.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
Google this shit because, I like saw it in my internet, travels, but I don't really remember it that well. But yeah, they basically did research and basically, math was how they came to this conclusion. But it made me think of, a few months ago when the government came out and released those videos, basically admitting that, there were UFOs, that Navy fighter pilots had been seeing UFOs, and I don't know, kind of in the same vein as that, really.
Well, that's always been the that's always been the idea behind the Fermi paradox. When you do the math
Right.
with how many solar systems there are and how many planets there are, and sure, you have to kind of be in the Goldilocks zone, and you have to have water, and you have to have a
But just the sheer, like
magnetosphere.
the fact that there's billions of planets.
Exactly. When they do that math,
Right.
it's like they should be everywhere.
Right.
They really should be everywhere. You know what? I think the answer to the Fermi paradox is quite simple, and it's also quite depressing. There's just too much space in between.
There are species, but too much space in between.
And I don't know. There could be faster than light travel.
But how do we explain then those videos that the Pentagon released a few months ago?
Well, I would say that those are probably aliens. But the idea behind the Fermi paradox being that the aliens should be everywhere. You know, they should be visiting us all the time. I would say that those are aliens. I just think that maybe 0.0000001% of the intelligent species out there have discovered how to go faster than light.
Right.
You know.
No, or maybe not faster than light, but maybe how to use wormholes or some other.
Yeah, that too. That's a different. But it's crazy because light's always been like the speed limit. The physical speed limit.
3.00 times 10 to the 8th meters per second. Yep.
And it's crazy how slow it is.
Yeah.
When you're comparing it to the sizes.
Well, but a lot of that is just temporal. Like, it's slow to us, and it's slow to move between these objects. But if you imagine that the universe, hard to imagine really, but if you imagine that the universe and therefore the galaxies and all the solar systems in the universe are expanding from the Big Bang, which happened 16. What is it? What do they think it happened? 16 billion
years ago.
16 billion years ago. Then it makes sense why everything would be so far apart.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Because all those things are expanding,
Mm-hmm.
initially at least, at the speed of light and potentially slowing
Right.
down over time.
Right.
But, you know, if you have 16 billion years to go 3.00 times 10 to the 8th meters per
Right.
second,
Right.
you create a lot of space from one end to the other.
Right. And it's intraversable.
Yeah, for us who live 70 years if we're lucky, yeah, you know.
I mean, even if we live to be
We'd have to
thousands
live
of years
thousands
old,
of years.
it's-
I mean, to get anywhere really, yeah. It's quite fascinating, though, to think about all of it. It's so much more interesting than all the religious stories.
Oh.
Like,
Yeah.
like, maybe for a long time when it was just the unknown and religion, like, kind of gave an answer.
Right.
But now religion gives an answer that's, like, cheap and far too easy. Whereas, like, the stuff that scientists are coming out with and the stuff that, like, advanced mathematics and physics and stuff are, like, kind of indicating about the laws of the universe and the way the universe functions is so much deeper
Yeah.
and more interesting
Right.
on every level
On
than
every
any
level.
stupid religious thing that we ever thought up 2,000 years ago.
On every level.
Yeah.
Because there's even if you like, so when they talk about infinity, how like the universe is infinite and there's infinite parallel universes, and just the idea of infinity means that every possible scenario is taking place, like all of that kind of stuff. You know, same thing with the chimps typing out Shakespeare. You know, if there was an infinite amount of them over an infinite, that's hard for people to grasp. Like, well, and even for me, that's a little bit like, it's a little bit wobbly to grasp some of that stuff. But without a doubt, you can believe that there are other species relatively close to us that are having similar discussions with each other
Right.
about, and that in by itself, that is fucking fascinating. I mean, I can't find the exact.
It's the first one.
this.
No, back. It's that video. Well, that video is just telling the story, which the news outlets were also all talking about.
That's only 2 minutes.
I'm going to go pee.
How long it took, we know what kind of metallicity, that is the kind of metals we have. And if you look at what other stars in our galaxy has those properties, you're able to come up with this number, which the average is 36 for the number of possible planets that could host intelligent communicating civilizations. One of the big unknowns in this is how long do these intelligent communicating civilizations last. If it's very short, then you wouldn't expect to see very many. But if it's very long, say a few million years, then you would expect to find more. So by finding these, we're going to find out some idea of how long our own civilization could last.
Okay, well, if we're looking to find them, then we can only assume they're looking to find us if the developmental progress has been about the same. So why has there not been any sort of communication, in your opinion?
That is a great question, and that's known as the Fermi paradox, and it's something that people have been asking about for decades now. My personal take is that it's just very rare that these type of civilizations that could communicate, that have technology, are very rare, and that their lifetimes are not very long. Even if they're thousands of years, you still would not expect to find very many close to us. So they're just far away, and so we just haven't been able to detect them yet. They haven't been able to detect us because we've only been emitting light, like radio waves, into the galaxy for about 100 years. And 100 light years is how far that could have traveled, but that's not very far. So it will take thousands of years for our detections, our radio emission to reach those other stars where possibly life exists. So it's just that they're so far away. It's probably the reason we haven't seen them yet, and that's what our calculations suggest.
Like something's over there for sure.
Really? By the, like, just over there?
Conservationists and gardeners alike are
Could've
wondering
just been
where
like a
have all
rat
the
or
bees
something.
gone. Experts say 200.
Well, we've gone for a good minute. Yeah, we've gone for 2 hours. Anything else you want to talk about before we wrap?
Not really. That didn't take very long.
No, they fly by. Even when you do them by yourself, they fly by.
Really.
Yep.
When I used to have my radio show with a local radio station, I don't remember it flying by,
Uh-huh.
but I wasn't really relaxed when I did it.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, you got to relax. I mean, the radio, one of the things that makes it easy to relax on here is because I'm always like, well, no one's listening. There were a couple nights, too, where I was like kind of nervous. I'd see a couple viewers or whatever, and I'm like, and then I'd see like no one watching. I'm like, thank God. I mean, I want people to watch. Don't get me wrong. I want you guys to watch and subscribe and all that, but it does take the pressure off a little bit. Like, oh,
Yeah.
I could say anything I want. No one's listening.
I can say this. I'm excited about Dungeons and Dragons, dude.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of fun with it, man. I really have.
Well, mom's gonna help me with the kids tomorrow. I think she'll be able to probably handle the latter half while we start playing.
If we get a local game together, we need to stream that, I think.
Yeah.
Because with the minis and with potentially with terrain,
right,
and it would be
Make it
easier
good.
to do it locally, I think.
Yep.
Like with in one space, I mean, like
Yep.
have cameras and have everybody like.
And we could even like what I'm doing with my phone. I think if I downloaded that program onto your phone and like another phone for
Well, I have a really nice fucking camera, dude. I
But
have
is
like a
it-
$2,000 fucking DSLR camera that I bought.
like a video camera.
Well, it's a still, but it takes videos.
Oh man, I didn't know that.
Yeah, 24 megapixel. Like, I mean, it cost me like $2,000 when I bought it.
I didn't know. I didn't know you had that. Well, yeah, use that instead of the phone. I mean, this
And I have a
quality isn't-
tripod, and
this quality isn't great, but it's
fine.
It's okay. It's better than no video feed at all.
I have really enjoyed playing my cleric, man. Let me tell you, it's powerful.
Are you
little overpowered?
Are you enjoying our campaign more than Jen's campaign?
I think so. But to be fair, I'm enjoying my character a lot more.
Yeah.
Listen. The paladin is good. Paladins are really strong in
Uh-huh.
D&D 5e.
Yeah.
They're very, very strong. They're way stronger than they used to be. In fact, you know, if you're going to play a martial class, which is kind of the position that I got put in, she said, like, we have this, and this in our group. And, she, you know, we have a rogue, a bard, and a druid or something like that.
Mhm.
It's like, and she kind of told me we need a martial character.
Right.
So I had to play like sword and board something.
Yeah.
I
Yep.
couldn't. What I really wanted to roll was a wizard, to be honest
Uh-huh,
with you, because
uh-huh.
they get so many. And what I found actually that I hadn't known before is that one of the things about D&D I like is spellcasting.
Right.
Because with spellcasting, there's a lot of creativity in it.
Yeah.
Like, you know,
It's not just I hit, I block.
right. When I
hit.
played a barbarian, like a few years ago when we played, I played a dwarf barbarian, it was fun, but it was every turn was the same thing.
Right.
I swing my axe. I swing
Yep.
my axe like
Yeah.
every single time. I go into a rage and I attack.
Which gets old. And even with feats, like, you know, I always played a fighter and I'd get a lot of feats. The feats were all, they weren't like a strategy thing.
Right.
Like, you don't pop a feat like you would a spell given a certain circumstance, you know, to beat a certain opponent. Like, feats just exist. You know, you're fighting 10 dudes, you get a feat cleave or great cleave where you get to attack and you get used to those feats. It doesn't add any creative elements. There's no strategizing.
And that's the fun thing about D&D. The fun thing about he's okay. I like dogs. The fun thing about D&D is that is the creative element of it.
Right.
You know, it's not round after round saying I charge the big bad guy
Yeah.
and swing over and over and over, because that is fun to a certain degree, but it'll get old.
It gets old.
You know?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying, like, here's the thing is, like, every good party has to have a martial character,
Right.
because you kind of need balance.
Yeah.
And being a fighter or being a paladin or being a barbarian can definitely be fun if you have a lot of RP and
Right.
like other stuff that makes it fun. But what I found about the cleric that I like is I have this spell list with diverse spells that I can try to make work for any situation.
Right.
And there's just a lot of fun being like, ooh, I'm going to bust this one out.
Yeah.
I'm going to bust this one.
Yep.
I'm going to do this now.
I'm going to wait on this
Like,
one
this
just
is a
in
perfect
case.
situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to hold some of my spell slots because I,
Leo!
you know, what if
Stop.
what if before my next long rest the DM's going to throw some stuff at me? You know, like what if this isn't our last encounter of the day? I have to have more spell
Right.
slots available, or else I'm useless. You know,
Right.
so there's just a lot more, like, at least for me, thought into it. Now, with that being said, the Paladin is very strong. The reason I picked Paladin is because they're fucking strong. They have an ability called Divine Smite,
Mm-hmm.
which basically if you hit something, you get to pick. Like, you get to make the decision to use Divine Smite after you've already hit something.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like you risk not getting it.
Right.
So once you know you've hit the animal or the creature you're attacking,
You can
you
tag
can,
it
you
on
can Divine Smite, and what you do is you blow a spell slot, and so like if you use a first level spell slot, it's 2d8 extra.
Mm-hmm.
Second, 3d8. Fourth,
Mm-hmm.
up and up by a d8 per level
Mhm.
for the spell slot,
Right.
and it's radiant damage that gets added.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the kicker: if you use it on a crit, when you crit, you roll all of the dice double. So yesterday, when we were playing in that mission, she threw a hill giant at us,
Mhm.
which is a pretty hard encounter. Like, this hill giant could have easily one-shotted or two-shotted us, like potentially deadly encounter. Over 100 hit points this beast had.
Mm-hmm.
And
You
like
guys are like level 2?
level 4.
Oh, wow.
But
you're
it had
leveling up
over
fast.
well, we started. I didn't start at the beginning of the campaign.
Gotcha.
They had already been playing. They
Mhm.
needed a player,
Right.
and so I was like, I'm not getting enough D&D in my life. I want more D&D. so where was I? Anyway,
It was over 100 hit points.
over 100 hit points, big like a hill giant, pretty tough creature for a level 4 party.
Yeah.
So I roll. The first roll I have is a nat 20 critical.
Uh-huh.
So I fucking blow my Divine Smite, which is plus 2d8. So my longsword, I'm a sword and board paladin.
Uh-huh.
So I get d8 plus the 2d8s, but it all doubles. So I got to roll 6 d8s
Oh, my God.
plus my damage. So with one hit, I hit it for 39. with
Jesus
one swing of the
Christ.
sword, dude. And only
Jesus.
blowing a first level spell slot.
That's badass.
Yeah, paladins are fucking pretty strong.
Well-
And they loosened up a lot of the restrictions around Like, one of the things that used to make paladins really annoying to play was that you had to be lawful good.
Right.
They had all the alignment. Well, D&D 5e kind of took alignment away.
Well, because didn't the old versions come up with the anti-paladin too, which was like the same
Oathbreaker type shit.
It was like the same thing,
But then you had to be evil.
Then
like
you had
to
to
be
be
evil.
evil,
Yeah.
yeah.
So this is different. Like, I took the Oath of Conquest, which means like I don't have any alignment or anything. In fact, alignment doesn't really exist that much in D&D 5e. But as the Oath of Conquest paladin, basically I I can't really show mercy to my opponents. That's like kind of the thing that I have to abide by.
Right.
Which isn't so bad.
Right.
You know.
Don't
Like-
you feel like alignment, maybe for NPC, well, even for NPCs, I just feel like it's one of those stats that shouldn't have ever existed.
I agree.
Because
It comes out in your RP.
exactly.
Yeah.
However you want to play the character,
Right.
that's going to be your alignment. And if you've been playing like a jerk and all of a sudden you have a change of heart, well, that's realistic. That happens to people in real life.
Or if you've been playing like a good guy and then you turn into a jerk, that fucking happens.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
the alignment, it always felt to me like it was kind of boxing people in. Like, okay, you have to behave this way.
Right. And it's one of the things that made the Paladin in particular like almost unplayable, is that it took your element of RP out of it and kind of guided you on how you were supposed to RP constantly.
Right.
Like, I have to always be the lawful good guy, or I have to always be the chaotic evil
Right.
guy, or whatever, or lawful evil,
Right.
never chaotic, or whatever
Now,
it was.
with that said, I do respect when players have a character and they stick to the character. You know,
Yes.
when the character has their
Yeah.
own motivations, as opposed to some of our friends in the past played characters just based like you'd play a video game. Like, I feel like doing this, that's what I'll do. They didn't take into consideration
Right.
what their character would do.
Right.
And I do respect that, but people do evil good people do evil things sometimes, and evil people sometimes help
Yep.
people out. I mean, there's no black and white, and yeah, I always felt like that was a weird thing to even classify to begin with. Like, it'll come out in the way you play,
Well, the other thing is that my characters are very similar, which is what I didn't want. I didn't want to roll a paladin.
Yeah, you wanted to mix it up.
Right. Like, I had a cleric already, and I really like my light cleric. He's probably my favorite character that I've ever played.
Mm-hmm.
Just from
Magnus.
I fucking like Magnus, dude. He's got his quirks. He's like into Paylor to a stupid degree, and he has fun spells.
Right.
He's a cleric, but he's basically he's a blaster.
Right.
He's a full magic class. I will get 9th level spells,
Uh-huh.
and I'm a blaster.
Yeah.
Like, what I specialize in is dropping fireballs
Like
and shit.
what do they call it? Pyromancer or
Yeah,
pyro.
I fucking do spell damage. That is the point of that class.
Yep.
A light cleric is, I have a little bit of healing, but I'm a fucking blaster. And it's funny because he's like obsessed with Paylor, whereas my paladin is like kind of similar to Magnus in some ways, but he's like obsessed with himself. That is he's like, he has a
Narcissism.
high charisma, super narcissist. Like, in quite a few of the conversations that he's gotten in, like, where people, like, yesterday, for instance, I went into a tavern and I met somebody, introduced myself, and they introduced themselves to me, and they were like, "It's nice to meet you. I'm an owl."
Uh-huh.
Remember, like we were
Yeah.
talking about Humblewood, right? So I'm an owl. Can you guess what my name is?
You're an Al Paladin. Al Borland.
Hootie. Hootie of the house in the Blowfish.
I would have never guessed that. Oh god.
So this guy's like, "It's nice to meet you, Hootie," and I'm like, "I'm sure the pleasure is more yours than it is mine." Like, stuff like that. He's just like a dick.
Well, it's your lucky day. You get to meet me, Hootie.
Exactly. He's just like a kind of like a douche a little bit because he's so obsessed with himself. But he has,
Now, is he like an owl man?
that's the thing with the whole Humblewood thing is that, yeah, we're all like,
So you have owl features, but you're
I'm not like an owl man. I'm like an owl. I'm like an owl wearing a breastplate with a shield and a fucking longsword. I don't know. Like, I'm not saying it's bad if Jen is watching.
No,
It's just
Jen's
different.
great, but yeah, that seems.
It's
weird.
not high. It's not humans and dwarves and elves like
Right,
what we're used
right,
to.
right.
It's kind of different. And I love, like, I've actually been enjoying it, but
Yeah, I actually like Jen a lot. I feel like a lot of the things I do in our campaign, though, Jen's probably like,
well, you gotta deal with you and me and Spencer and fucking, I'm sure Austin keeps it tamped down because he's got to keep her happy more than we do.
right. Ugh.
But
Yeah, I'm excited to play again.
me too.
One of the other things I was thinking when you're talking about how you wanted to play like a spellcaster because the creative options, you know, obviously you don't want to tell other people what to do, but you can kind of explore that creativity vicariously through others. Like, hey, Austin, this spell might work really good in this situation.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like that
Right.
kind of thing, just by knowing. I always played a fighter. I never knew any of the spells. I had heard you guys using them, whoever was using spells. Not very many of us use spells.
No, we never. None of us ever got a high level spellcaster.
No.
I don't even. I think Patty might have haven't had like a 7th level sorcerer, but Patty was so like
He was
so dumb
He was the
about the
worst.
game
Yep.
that we certainly never got to see what that could look like. But just from watching like Critical Role and the other one I watched, the Dungeons of Drakkenheim, the
Mhm.
Dungeon Dudes game,
Yep.
which is pretty good actually.
Yeah.
You can really see like with a spell how creative you can be.
Right.
Like, you know,
Yeah.
just like pretty cool stuff that you can
Right.
do, and that's the beauty of D&D. Like, I'm not saying, again, I've played mostly martial classes and have always enjoyed D&D.
But every group should have. I mean,
good
depending
mix.
depending on the size of the group, one or two, like, solely focused on spellcasting, and I do think that would add to it. And I know if I was a spellcaster, and other people were suggesting things for different situations, I wouldn't feel like they're stepping on my toes.
Right.
In fact, it might actually make me happy to know that my group knows about my spells like I do,
Right.
and they're always thinking about what I could be doing.
Well,
you
that's
know?
my next character is gonna be like fucking wizard, old man wizard, like
Yeah.
Gandalf, motherfucker, 100%,
Yeah.
dude. Because the sheer amount of spells that wizards can get, like you get up to like level 15, and you're
Just
not
beast.
like. I'm not saying you're unkillable or anything like that,
Leo's
but you've got a real unique and creative answer to any solution, any situation, And that's the fun thing about D&D is like, exploring different character types and different RPs, and I don't know. I'm excited. I've even had fun with the minis. I want to get more minis.
Mhm.
Like, I hope Gina never watches this or watches this far into this. But after my minis get here, I'm gonna have enough orcs and goblins
Leo.
to have like goblin and orc, like actual minis, like make up a party of like 60 or more.
Uh-huh.
And once I have that, I can have like small wars almost.
Well, you said you have like 75 now,
but they're
right?
not goblins and orcs.
Oh,
That's like
oh,
of all
six-
different 60
60
plus
goblins.
goblins and orcs.
How many goblins and orcs do you have now? Like 15?
Well, painted, no, I'm more than that. Painted, I have the bugbear, and he's a goblinoid. I have 12 goblins painted. I have 10 orcs painted. But
So-
when it's all said and done, more.
So goblins, orcs, and bugbears are all goblinoids?
No, in
Just
fact,
goblins and bugbears?
well, just and hobgoblins,
And hobgoblins.
which are also hobgoblins are kind of cool too. Hobgoblins are actually pretty fucking tough. If I know that the monster manual has been missing, but you can look it all up on Google
Yeah.
on D&D Beyond,
Right.
and you'll see that hobgoblins have some pretty nasty abilities. Like they get advantage if two of them are attacking the same guy, like, or are within 5 feet of each other. Like, so hobgoblins en masse can be really fucking deadly, and they usually wear like a lot of armor and are like really proficient fighters. They're not just like dumb.
And they're bigger
dum-dums.
too, right? Than
They're
goblins?
as big as men. They're as
Okay.
big as men, and they wear like full plate.
So they're more like an orc.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing with D&D. D&D is kind of different than like Tolkien's world.
Yeah.
Tolkien kind of like lumps orcs, goblins, all that to one.
Right.
Like they all
like,
roll together.
They're all like elves, right? That that evolved over time.
Yeah, like
weren't
they're
goblin-
different races. Like he doesn't say they're all the same race. Like they are different races, but they're all in like in Tolkien, at least in Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, they're all in service of either the Dark Lord Sauron or like
Morgoth.
the King of the Goblins and fucking the Misty Mountains and
Right.
The Hobbit, or like. But in D&D,
Yeah.
orcs and goblins rarely mingle.
Right.
Like orcs are like much less organized and are usually in travel in like caravans and are like pretty brutish.
Orcs are less organized than goblins.
Yes,
Really?
whereas goblins and hobgoblins are like more organized
more of a
and
hierarchy.
have like hierarchy and like see, if I ever get around to creating a D&D world or DMing or something, I don't think I would do that. Like that's
No.
how it is. That's how it's done in the D&D
Yeah.
itself game.
Uh-huh.
Or how the monster manual writes up orcs and goblins. But I
Right.
don't think that's how I would do it. I
I
think I
guess-
would lump them all together.
I guess they feel like for orcs to be more barbarians, they have to be less organized. But yeah, I mean, maybe I had a Tolkien-esque view of it, but I've always thought of orcs as like goblins, bigger, older brothers in a way, like kind of the same thing, but just the bigger version
And D&D kind of filled that niche with hobgoblins.
Right.
And then with bugbears. Even
Right.
like bugbears are like 7 foot tall goblins,
right.
which are like super sneaky and pretty tough for
Yeah.
a group of low level guys to fight.
Uh-huh.
If you consider like level 1 player characters have between like 8 and 15 hit points and a bugbear has like 35
Right.
and can do like 15 damage in a hit, you don't want to send a party of level 1s up to it unless you want somebody to die.
Yeah, I've been looking. I found that dragon sorcerer guy and I played him terribly. He didn't do it. He didn't do a goddamn thing, dude. But your encounters, like so far your guys' encounters have been, run of the mill, kill a bunch of things,
Spellcasting.
I want to not like come up with as an event, but I want to find the right monsters, challenge rating wise, but also I want something that really goes outside the box and makes you guys think and work together. And
Well, a good dungeon, or not even like a dungeon, but like a cave system or some sort of like castle or something,
right.
can force the player characters to do that. Like not even just the boss at the end of the
Mhm.
whole thing, but a maze or something that like
Yeah.
people have to think to get through.
How would we do a maze on a stream? Because I've thought about stuff like that too, and it's like
I don't.
and I've thought about like throwing puzzles at you guys, especially when I was planning you guys being underground and getting through those doors and stuff. The problem with throwing puzzles at you is it kind of breaks roleplay, because all of a sudden you're relying on your intelligence, not your character's intelligence. And I don't know what the balance there is. I don't know if that's okay.
I think it's a. Nah, I see what you're saying. Maybe just a necessary evil, though.
Right.
Like at the end of the day, we're playing our characters,
Mm-hmm.
and our characters have limitations. But how do you separate like our character's low intelligence from our maybe higher intelligence?
Right, because I mean, if your character in the world has a really high intelligence and would be like a genius level thinker, but the person playing it has average intelligence, and I throw like a crazy puzzle at you guys. I mean, going by the role play, like I was thinking that the puzzle itself, you can't do it. You can't throw a crazy puzzle at you guys. You have to just roll to see whose intelligence, but that's not fun.
No, it's better to introduce the puzzle, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's
I mean,
Good to
so
know.
like, we have a pretty well-rounded party,
right.
pretty well,
Right.
but not perfectly well-rounded. We don't have a good sneak, really. Like
Yeah.
Spencer, and I'm not saying that he should have done anything in particular because he was kind of pigeonholed.
Right.
Like he was the last person to pick
Yeah.
a character, and I remember when he picked his character, he's like, okay, so it's either going to be between rogue or monk because that's what it looks like this party doesn't have.
Right.
But Austin is clearly the marshal. We've got a barbarian raging at the front who hits like a fucking train, and who, when he goes into a rage, has resistance. That's the other thing. I'm not telling you how to kill Austin, but you know how when you do damage to Austin, he's always like, oh, that's half damage, half damage to that, half damage. That's because when he rages, he has resistance to like piercing, bludgeoning, like,
But not certain spell.
not like psychic or probably not fire. I mean, you'd have to look up, I don't have the player's handbook here, but you could see it's not like magical damage. It's
Right.
just like your run-of-the-mill damage. So if you want to damage Austin, you got to hit him with that.
Right.
I'm just saying.
Well, yeah, and I would never try to kill characters, but in order for it to be fun,
You also have that element, which is difficult. I imagine really difficult, like how to balance encounters
yeah.
so that they're difficult, but
And
so that you don't fucking wipe the party.
Right. Right.
How do you
Yeah.
there's a lot about DMing that's much more difficult than being a player character. for
I
sure.
do, and so I would still say like I'm not very good right now, but every time we do it, I feel better about it. I feel like if I did this for, I don't know, maybe another couple months or so, I would be at the point where I'm confident. Where I'm confident telling other people like, yeah, I DM and I could DM.
Mhm. I feel still like I need to learn a lot of the rules stuff.
Yeah.
Like I ask Austin a lot. I feel like about what like a good example of this is in a turn or in your turn in a round, like all the different things you can do.
Right.
And I watched a good video on it earlier, but to try and make sense of this to myself. But you have an action, you have a bonus action, you have a reaction, you have an interaction, and you have movement that you can all do in a round. And it
Jesus.
sounds like there's 5 things basically that you have to keep in mind, but every player character can do it. If you're if you're a dwarf and you move 25 feet in a turn, if that's your speed, well, that you can move 25 feet in a turn, and then you can attack. And then if you have a spell or if you're something that has an ability that allows you to use a bonus action, you can do that.
Right.
And then if somebody attacks you and you have the sentinel feat, you can use that as your reaction. Or like,
What if you don't have Sentinel? Where would reaction come in?
reaction comes in different abilities. Like fighters, for instance, have a lot of ability. Like if you're the fighter class,
Right.
they have a lot of abilities that are reaction based.
So-
One example is riposte. Like if somebody attacks you, you can expend your reaction to do riposte. I'm not even sure how it works, but I know it's one of their reaction abilities. Or sorcerers can use the shield spell as a reaction. Like, oh, I'm getting attacked. Or like my cleric has warding flare. If you declare that somebody's attacking me, as a reaction, I can use warding flare and impose disadvantage on his attack.
So reaction is always going to be coupled with either an ability or a spell.
Right, and it's not going to happen on your turn. It's not actually. It's going to happen in the round of your turn.
Right. When
But it's
someone
not going
does
to.
something.
And you only get one react. I can't warding flare every attack in a round.
Right.
I can warding flare one.
Right.
So that's that.
Huh.
And interaction is more like up to DM interpretation. It's more like I open the door.
Right.
That doesn't take your action. That's just like, or I look through the window.
It doesn't take
Or
any.
I talk to somebody.
Those don't
No,
take any
it doesn't
amount
take
of your-
action. It doesn't take movement.
Just like a side
You
thing.
know. I'll
Huh.
send you that video that I watched earlier. They kind of explain, but that was all stuff that I didn't until really today, that I didn't really know about. That I'd have to like ask Austin.
Right.
Like, what can I do right now?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, like what is it? But, and then that'll make sense of like how. It also pairs with the whole mini thing, having miniatures.
Right.
And
'Cause
having
you
a
can
grid.
see where they're at.
Right,
and-
because like if you're a rogue, you can say, all right, I'm going to use 10 feet of my movement to get into the hallway. I'm
Mhm.
going to fire with my crossbow, I'm going to use 10 feet of my movement to get back off and have cover.
Oh shit!
Like stuff
Way
that
more
we
tactical than just
right.
like I'm gonna attack the first guy.
That's all. That's like the whole element of D&D that we have never, because we've never played with a grid or miniatures. Or I know for sure I haven't. That I had never seen.
Yeah.
Every combat encounter has always been like, I attack, I do this. You know, is that guy close enough to me? Okay, he is close enough. I attack. And when I watch like Critical Role or the Dungeons of Drakenheim, you see like how actually having a map and the miniatures laid on the map interacts with the way the rules of D&D are written.
Right.
Which is you have this movement and this, you know, this allows you to do this. You can move this far, make an attack, and then move behind this pillar.
Right.
And like all this other stuff comes into play. Like, and then some characters being on a fucking balcony and climbing speeds, swimming speeds, all this, the way the rules of the game are written.
Right.
You know.
Right.
Anyway.
Well,
and that's why I've been fiercely working to paint minis, and I
Yeah.
want to make fucking terrain because I want to play D&D that way.
Yeah, and we should. And beyond not having minis, I mean, it would have been maybe hard. Maybe we could have done it on graph paper or something. But we could have played more of a tangible tactical game than we used to play. I don't know if it's because we were kids or what.
It was terrible.
The D&D, I always had fun with it. But the D&D we used to play was so like...
We'd like roll some dice and Spencer'd be like, you killed 35 that turn. And like, it just wasn't... I don't mean to knock it.
No
like,
offense to Spencer either.
No, of course none. And I don't mean to knock it. But it wasn't...
It wasn't how the game's drawn up to be
No.
played.
Like the whole point of spells, the point of like spells with area of effects, like cones,
Right.
cubes, you know, dropping a ball of fire, like all of this different stuff, like it all kind of require, like you can do theater of the mind, you totally can do it, but the game is written to have a grid.
And I mean, that's just a product of being a game. Like games require rules and some sort of foundation.
And the beauty of that, what separates it from a video game is that there's still all the creativity. There's still the fact that you can cast Bigby's hand,
Right.
and have Bigby's hand pick your player character up and fly you on top of the nearest building.
What the hell is Big B?
It's a spell.
Who is Big B and what is the hand?
It's
just a magic
I don't know
hand?
who Bigby is, but it's like a big magic hand that is a pretty high level spell. We'd have to look up how high level. I don't think clerics get it, but I think wizards and sorcerers
And
do. But
it'll-
one of the guys, the only reason I bring that up is one of the guys in Critical Role who has like a high level cleric uses it. And dude, this guy uses it to like, you know, he gets in trouble and he casts Bigby's hand and it picks him up and like carries him off. And then he's like still dropping bombs and doing shit. But that's all, like that's stuff that you can do within the game,
Right.
but also like that separate D&D from a video game.
Right.
The creativity to just open the whole thing up.
Right.
Like there's a building there, I'm going to get on top of it.
Right.
There's this there, I'm going to do this.
Right.
There's just like all this other stuff.
Yeah.
And then of course the players and the DM are making a story,
Right.
which is the best part of it.
Do you think any of those games or any of those DMs have created their own spells? Or is that one of those things that once you start creating spells, you break the game because of balance and
I mean, I think that they have. I know that people homebrew stuff like that. Just from like, you know, I've been binging on D&D shit for like over a month right now. So yeah, I know people homebrew stuff, but I think that there is a danger of that.
yeah.
You know, like if you're homebrewing wizard spells, you know, your player characters probably want to play a wizard,
Right.
you know, because they're going to
Well,
have... And it's not to say that everything in the player's handbook's balanced or in the...
No,
like,
it can't be.
it isn't.
Dude, when
It's
I
not
worked
perfect.
at 2K, I saw how hard it is to balance games.
Real hard.
Because, like, Battleborn, have you ever heard of Battleborn? It was the game that came out when Overwatch came out that was competing with Overwatch. And it's basically the same thing. It's cartoony. It's a shooter. You play online. You know, different characters have different guns and abilities. And I tested on that for like a year. It was always broken. The balance was always broken. They could not get it 100% right, and it was because there was like, I think 10 playable characters that weren't like DLC. You try balancing 10 characters that have different abilities. You know, they'd buff one of them, and when they buff that one of them would all of a sudden become weaker because of whatever reason, you know. And it was never balanced. So everyone that was testing it, you know, you'd get to a point in testing where you know they're not going to fix any more bugs because the deadline's coming up, and they've said like only game-breaking bugs, only crashes. And at that point, what they want you to do is just play with each other online and just report the crashes and desyncs, like when everyone's playing online and the game keeps going, but you're not playing against each other all of a sudden. Like their character model is doing something that they're not actually doing. Those kind of things. So we'd be playing, for months we were just playing against each other. And I saw how fucking broken that game was.
Right.
Now the devs don't want to hear about, you know, how unbalanced it is because they have a deadline.
Yeah.
That's coming up, and they don't have time to try to fucking fix all that shit. They just have to fix the game-breaking bugs and get the game out. So they're basically telling you guys, like, just shut the fuck up. If your game crashes, tell us about it. Otherwise, we don't want to hear about your opinions. They hated that, dude. We would try to give them our opinions on different things that sucked in different games, you know, wrestling, Mafia, and they fucking hated it. They're like, you peons. Don't tell us how to design our game. It's like, well, I don't know how to design a game, but I can tell when a game's unfair. And it was hard to balance that shit. Now, like rock, paper, scissors. Why does rock, paper, scissors work? Because you have 3 fucking things.
That all do one thing.
Right. Simple.
Yeah.
You try to take the concept of rock, paper, scissors and expand it and make it this big thing. Good luck, dude. It's going to be off, you know?
Well, and that's the same as when I played a lot of Warcraft. Had the same problem. You have different classes. Each class had different subclasses.
Right.
And so between the classes and the subclasses, there was like, 15, 20 different options for what kind of shit you were playing. There's no way to balance that. It was always unbalanced, even though, it was never balanced.
Yeah.
It was never balanced.
It's everything. I mean,
and that's just how the nature of games.
Yeah. Magic the Gathering was never balanced.
No.
There was always like
that game's fucking dumb.
Well, so here's why Magic sucks. It's the paywall.
It's the paywall.
It's the idea that like you have to pay an exorbitant amount for certain cards because Wizards of the Coast knows that those cards are the most useful at any particular time, and
and they print less of them.
Right.
And then they create demand.
It's the
Get
paywall.
People out there buying boosters, getting like huge numbers of duplicates at commons and uncommons just to try and get the one they want. Well, and the fact that they phase out, which is part of the paywall, but it's like,
and I feel like part of their intention behind that is balance, because they know that the smaller the field of cards, the easier it is to balance, but also a bigger part of that is just knowing that they need to sell whatever the new edition is.
Right.
And I think that's the same for D&D. I think, I don't know if 5 is better than 3.5, and I don't know if there was anything in between those. It seems like they skipped 4. But the fact of the matter is, like, 3.5 was working, and before that 3 was working. They just wanted to sell a whole new set of books.
Oh, yeah.
So they update it's like the college textbook thing.
Yeah, exactly. Although I do, as someone who's played now 3, 3.5, and 5, I do believe that 5 is the best D&D I've ever played.
Why did they skip 4?
No, 4 exists.
4 exists,
but 4 came out in a time when I wasn't playing D. I don't know. 4 came out when we were like 8. When I was like 18.
Yeah.
So it was just as my days of playing D were over.
Right.
And then it occupied a period of time when I didn't play, and then when I started playing again, 5 was out. So
that is the benefit of D. If the balance seems too out of whack, the DM can always step in.
Yeah.
Like in Magic, It is what it is, man. If the guy has the card and the card says it does the thing, that is what it is. You accept it.
Did I ever tell you what I did with all my Magic cards?
You gave him to Lil Dave?
No, I gave him to this kid, Zach.
What you gave some to Lil Dave, didn't you?
Oh, what did I give to little Dave?
Maybe your PlayStation or something?
No.
So you gave him to this kid, Zach.
Hundreds of dollars worth of Magic cards I gave to this kid.
Does he play?
Well, so at the time, his mom lives in Madrid, and she has I guess she has cancer, and it's not, anyway, pretty bad situation. And this kid was telling me, he was like 14 or something at the time, that he would play Magic the Gathering with his dad, but that his dad had a way better deck and would just roll him.
What is the point? What is the point in that?
Just whip it on your 14-year-old son.
Yeah, what is the point in that?
Not-
With the cards that you bought him,
Yeah, I'm not gonna buy you new cards. I'm gonna go out and buy myself cards, and I'm gonna crush you, son.
That's just fucked up, man.
So I I had these Magic cards sitting in my closet for years, like a decade basically at that point,
right.
and was just I'm not doing anything with these. This kid's pretty downtrodden. I'll just give him my Magic cards. Sounds insignificant, but I had probably $500 worth of Magic cards.
Yeah.
I had poured money into
Mm-hmm.
different Magic endeavors that I had
Mhm.
back when I played, as they get people to do,
Yep.
And anyway, this kid now is a Trump supporter, and not
He's
that
your enemy.
not that I regret giving him my Magic cards so he could beat his dad, which he told me he did. He's
How old is he now? 18?
he's 20 or something now, But he told me after that he busted out my old Magic decks on his dad and whipped his ass, which made me happy at least, because I can imagine his dumb douchebag dad getting schooled. What is this?
Well, it has to make you wonder too, because your cards were old by then. It has to make you wonder how bad his dad's decks were.
Well, but this also kind of speaks to what you were talking about before, is that my decks weren't type anything. My decks weren't type 2.
Right, so they might have been
My
OP.
zombie deck was pulled from it had cards in it that were beta,
Right.
and it had cards in it that were the newest when I stopped playing. So
Right.
it's a 20-year span, and that deck was a reliable 4-turn kill.
4 turns.
Yeah, a
Jesus.
reliable, very reliable 4 turns
Is
in
that-
somebody's deck.
That's the old zombie deck that you had when we used to play?
Well, it's that, and then I
You
probably did.
modified
I
it.
probably did more when
Yeah.
once I had a debit card and a bank account, and could buy cards off the internet, as I did for a while.
Weren't you telling me that Sean plays still?
I think he was. I think he was doing tournaments. Yeah,
Fucking Sean. Sean will do a tournament of anything.
he's a competitive guy. He just wants to compete. You can't fault him.
No, I've always liked Sean. I haven't talked to Sean in a
Honestly,
decade.
that's the best way to play that game,
In tournaments?
because the tournaments you don't show up with a deck.
Well, some of them you don't. Some of them are
Well,
like
what
the,
I had
the
heard
draws.
that he was doing was the draft,
Yeah.
the draft
Mhm.
tournaments, and that to me that's
That's
the
the-
best way to play the game,
the purest way.
because
No
still there's a lot of
advantages.
luck in terms of what you draw, what cards you get.
But it's 60 to 80 cards. The amount of variability, no one's going to get so lucky that they win the tournament based on their draw when you
Right.
have 60 or 80 cards.
Mhm.
If it was a 5-card deck, then I could believe it that the luck of the draw. But really, when you're drawing 60 or 80 cards, I feel like it comes down to strategy more than anything. Knowing what you have, knowing, I always played the same couple decks. I'd be terrible in a draw. I'd be reading each card what does this one do? Is this any good? I'd be terrible. That's where the real skill comes in, being able to look at a bunch of random cards and figure out what the fuck you're going to do with that to beat people.
Right.
You know?
Well, and that's the thing is if you're drawing cards like I was from every edition from the span of the game
Yeah,
existing,
you can create a god deck.
you can make one turn kill decks.
Yeah. Yep.
Like, I don't know if I ever told you, but I had made one. I didn't buy the cards for it, but I made it online and I priced it out, and I was gonna buy that motherfucker so I could bust it on people occasionally, just because it was like it was cheesy as fuck. But to kill somebody before they even drew a card or played a land would be fun.
Yeah. It is cheesy. The bad thing about that deck is you beat them once and then they're like, okay, you got any other decks? Like, what is this?
That was or the combo doesn't go off. You don't get what you need and you don't do anything. You're just like you're just useless.
Just
you know,
sitting there.
or the combo goes off and you're grinning ear to ear. You know.
Yeah, Cliff had that. He'd
Triskelion.
Proteus
staff and Triskelion.
He had that was a crazy combo.
You know what I remember about that is I just remember Cliff going like his cheesy like hand motions and sound effects.
Dude, I cannot believe that guy's been like married twice and he has kids.
I actually like wish that I talked more to Cliff because I really like Cliff.
Oh, me and Cliff never had any bad feelings. I've always liked Cliff. I just can't, when I heard he got, well, actually, I think I went to the first wedding. That was weird. Like, Cliff's getting married before me. Cliff in high school, Cliff was like, he was like the 40-year-old virgin. He was the one of us that like never talked to girls, never had a girlfriend, never. Here he is getting married, and then he like got divorced and got married right away.
Yeah, he dumped her. He left that girl for somebody else. Wasn't even like she left him. It was like he left her.
And he's led a weird life. He was in the military and he got dishonorably discharged.
He's been on the Geek Squad for like 20 years at this point.
Really? I like Cliff.
I do too. He's a goofy dude, but
have you followed what happened to Brent, his brother?
What happened to Brent?
Oh, I don't know. That's why I'm asking.
Oh, well, I'm friends with him on Facebook enough to know that he like lives in Denver, and I don't know much.
Does Cliff live in Denver or Cliff in Vegas?
I think Cliff lives in Texas.
Oh, well, I can see
think he
that.
lives in like San Antonio or somewhere.
Yeah, Cliff's a good guy.
When was the last time you talked to that guy?
So it's been a decade. It was when him and Justin and Brent lived in Timberlake or Allegro. We would go over there and play Soul Cal. Dude, those guys were good at Soul Calibur. I remember going over there thinking like, yeah, because I was never like the best. It was you and Spencer, and Kevin had his moments.
Kevin had Maxie.
Kevin had his moments.
Kevin would bust out Maxie, and sometimes he'd be real good.
Yeah, he was off and on though. Like there were days where I remember him getting his ass kicked with Maxie, but anyway, we went over there and I kept thinking like Spencer and you guys are gonna murk this fucking, and they were like better. They were like better. I mean, obviously they were better than me, but they were better than all of us. So I was like, oh my god.
That's just when you know.
Well, it's time, dude. It's how much time someone spends. We never even owned that game. Like, I only ever played it at Spencer's house,
That was the only game that, Chucky was always, like, better than me at video games.
Uh-huh.
But we played Soul Cal, and I whipped him.
Yeah.
And he got pissed and, like, went out and bought Soul Cal.
Oh, God.
You know?
That's a Chucky move.
Yeah, it is a Chucky move in high school,
Ugh.
So he goes out and, like, buys Soul Cal and, like, plays it for a few weeks. And, like, then he's like, hey, you want to come over? And I went over there and I beat him again. And he was just...
Come on, bro. Did you know that he was planning an ambush?
Oh, I think I probably, I was like 17. I was well aware of Chucky's tricks at that point, I knew how Chucky was.
The pride that some people have in video games.
It's sad that his mom died.
Oh, that's really sad.
It's sad. that
Do you
his
ever
mom
talk
died.
to Chucky?
I haven't talked to him in a long time, man. I really haven't.
He's still in California, as far as you know.
Yeah, he's married to Melanie Peterson.
Was she like at your school?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, before they were ever together, I went on a date with her.
Really?
Yeah. She was nice. She was on the debate team, but she wasn't really like in the debate part of it. She was
Right.
like in this. She did more of the speech type stuff.
Right.
I'm happy for Chuck, man. I feel like he's doing well, but it's been a while since. It's probably been years since I've talked to that guy, and I haven't talked to Joey Giorgione in a long time either.
Oh, I thought you were current with him and Kyler and all them. Not really. It's hard. You know, it's hard. You get older. I remember when I was younger thinking like, I'm never going to stop being friends with my friends. But like life happens, man. And it's not even like we're not friends anymore or I dislike the guy but like when you live in a different state and it's they're doing their thing, you're doing your thing, you just grow apart.
You know, the one out of all of them that I actually miss is Kevin.
I miss Kevin too.
Yeah. I tried to reach out to Kevin and he wouldn't
Really?
communicate.
Do you think Spencer still talks to him?
Well, when we were playing D, I asked him about it recently, you know, I don't know, a few weeks ago. And he said that he had seen Kevin or talked to Kevin like a year ago,
Long time.
but that he was teaching at some kind of like private school. He's a math teacher at.
Hmm.
Well, I just like to talk to him now because I feel like, you know, the last time I talked to him, we were in such different headspaces.
Mm-hmm.
Like I had just moved out to Madrid and was like smoking a lot of weed and like kind of just like burning out like as best I could.
Right.
And he had come out to see me, and at that time I think maybe he had just graduated from college and was already like working on his master's.
Right.
And we were just like in way different places.
Yeah.
And I feel like now,
You guys, you're coming back towards.
like I'm like, you know, I'm about to have my degree. Like I'm a year away from having my college degree, and I just feel like we,
would have more.
I don't know. Yeah, and I don't really like fucking
Yeah, I
stick
know.
around that much anymore.
I know what he did was.
I don't blame him that much though.
The thing is, well, here's the thing, dude. I think me and Kevin have a lot in common as far as like social anxiety,
Yeah.
and there's a good chance that he has a little bit of Asperger's or something going on. And you know, he wasn't trying to make enemies. He wasn't trying to upset
He
anyone.
just did what he wanted to do.
He did what he needed to do, probably.
Yeah.
He was probably having some sort of anxiety attack. What would it take for you to get up in the middle of the night and drive 12 hours or whatever, you know?
Yeah. Well, I won't ever hold it against that guy, man.
And guilt does a weird thing to people. There are people that I would love to talk to and apologize to, but I feel so guilty about the things that I did to them that I don't know if I could bring myself, you know? It's,
Yeah, I tried to he didn't have a Facebook anymore, so I looked up his sister and gave her my name and number and said, pass this on to Kevin. I'd like to talk to him. More than a year ago.
yeah.
And I never heard from him. But,
Yeah.
you know, such is the way, man. There may
Yeah.
come a day where he decides he wants to try and talk.
Right.
And I don't hold it against him. I was pissed off at him for a long time, but I don't know. Can't hold on to stuff like that.
You really can't. It feels there have been grudges that I've held. Now there's grudges that I still hold, but there have been grudges that I held that at a certain point I realized I could let it go, and I didn't, and it did feel good to just who gives a fuck, you know. But there are other grudges that I don't know if I'll ever let go.
Yeah.
You know, people have acted like when I saw Iris at certain points that I should have been friendlier and stuff, and it's like, go fuck yourself. Like, you have no idea. You have no fucking idea. You know, there is something to be said for forgiveness and all that, but there's also something to be said for just not involving people like that in your life.
That's how I feel about it.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't know. I can't think. I feel like what she did to you is pretty fucked.
But
You just like people like that, you just
Well,
better off not around them.
and that's the thing. I mean, that happened years ago. It doesn't upset
Isn't
me.
it crazy that that's been years already?
I know. It doesn't upset me in the same way that it did, obviously, but I'll never, like, forgive that person. I'll never tell that person I forgive them. I'll never talk
Right.
to that person in a nice way. Because it's at this point, it's the principle of it. Like, certain things you just can't get away with, you know? And I don't know if that's why I'm reluctant to apologize to some of the people that I've wronged, because I know that certain things are just beyond the pale. But
There's girls that I treated poorly that I would, like, if I had to talk to them, as in, like, I wouldn't reach out. You know, you're not going to reach out to ex-girlfriends when you're almost married
Yeah.
with kids and stuff.
even when you're single.
No. But, like, but if I had to talk to them, who I would probably readily admit mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also not a lot of value there.
No. Like, what good does that
There's
do?
not a lot of value
Yeah.
there. You know, I know that at different times in my life, and I'm sure that this is like this for everybody. You know, we all have moments in our lives when we don't act the way that we're gonna, like, look back on and be proud of.
Right.
But there's also nothing to be. A lot of the time, there's nothing you can say about it. You know, I don't know.
Yep. And there's nothing that person can say to me, you know, or other people in different can say that'll change or make it better.
It just
So it's-
is.
It just is. Yeah. It just is. I think more than anything, if you use those mistakes, not just that you've made, but that other people have done to you,
All
as a
learning experience.
yeah, as a just a thing, a rule book of things not to do moving forward. You know,
Yeah. Definitely.
don't fucking, you know, impregnate someone and go around telling everyone you're gonna have a baby with them, and then months into it, fucking leave them and have an abortion. You know, that seems like common sense. $257. We did 3 hours. That's a whole Joe Rogan experience right there.
I don't listen to a lot of Rogan. It's not that I don't like Rogan, man.
Well,
I do like Rogan.
some people don't like the long format.
I love the long format. For me, it's just about what he's talking about.
Mm.
If he's talking about UFC to people, I don't want to listen to 3 hours
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah.
Like, I can watch a fight highlight and be like, oh, that was exciting, but I'm not.
Right. He has some good ones. Like earlier this month, he had Brett Weinstein on, who's a biologist. And I like Brett Weinstein. Brett Weinstein was the guy that discovered the telomeres in mice, and lab mice are longer, and it like affects the tests and everything that they're doing on it. And they like talked in depth. Most of it was over my head. Like, I don't know that much about biology. I know what telomeres are, but
How did you discover that? Because, like, the rate of cancer was less in those animals?
well, eventually it came down to that they were just studying the DNA of the mice, you
Uh-huh.
know. And it seems pretty obvious that the FDA and all the companies, all the drug manufacturers that are running the tests, they knew this. They knew that lab mice weren't, you know, obviously mice aren't a good comparison for humans. They're mammals, but they're not the best comparison for humans anyway. But
I hadn't heard that before you said that.
But lab mice are not natural mice. They've all came from the same place. All the lab mice, I forget where they said they're bred, but they're all bred in one place, and they're shipped out to the whole world. And because they have lengthened telomeres, they don't, you know, I'm not a biologist, but what his big thing that he was talking about is, in human beings, evolution drives for stronger genetics in the short term and weaker genetics in the long term, essentially. So if there's something that can make you a stronger liver for the first 40 years of your life, that's going to be shown more in the genetic makeup than something that helps in later years, because we didn't live that long. for a
No,
long
we're just
time.
trying to procreate.
We're
when you
just
don't
trying
need
to
get 60
procreate.
to procreate.
Exactly. And the problem there is that when old people, when people like our parents' age are taking drugs that were tested on mice that have lengthened telomeres, and our parents have shortened telomeres, there's all these effects there that are unaccounted
Fascinating.
for. And he's the guy that like discovered that. He's written peer-reviewed papers on it. You know, everyone's accepted it, but no one addresses it. No one will address the fact that our methodology for testing everything is supremely flawed. It was already flawed because, again, I know, you know, mice probably share 96 or 95% of our DNA, but the telomere thing is a big deal because if you were running the same tests on wild mice, you would have vastly different results because as the lab mice get older, they're not showing the same signs of aging that a wild mice would. And they're not having the same negative effects or positive effects, whatever, that a wild mice would have because their telomeres aren't shortening. But anyway, but he said like Neil deGrasse, he has good ones. I don't listen to every one, but if you're like picky and choosy about which ones you listen to, you get some good ones. He had one of the astronauts on there that works for SpaceX now. And this guy's crazy. This guy was a NASA astronaut. He was like doing spacewalks and all that stuff. After he came back from being at the space station he got to like 98 days, and at 100 days they get a medal. So he was all pissed off, like I was 2 days away and they sent me home. He in the Bahamas, there's an underwater research station that's a lot like the space station. It's like 100 meters down or something, and they have to go down there and like let their pressurization equalize and all that stuff. And they live down there in this like space in this station thing that's like 100 meters underwater, and they live there for like a long time. He lived there for months, and just doing like research, same thing you would do if you were up in space. And but this thing sounds awesome, man. Like, so it's a big thing, and then because of the way it's like designed, there's like a pool, and you jump into the pool to swim out of it, and then you like swim back in, and to go to the bathroom, there was a separate thing, so they'd have to jump in and swim across the ocean floor to the separate thing and pop up, and there's a little bit of air in there. And he was talking about like taking shits in the middle of the night and like having to swim with like just a tiny little light, and there's a tiny little light on this like underwater outhouse, and you got to swim to it, and then you pop up and you're like in complete pitch black in the middle of the ocean taking a shit, and there's all these fish underneath your ass like eating your shit as you're shitting. And then you finish up and you got to like swim back another 30 yards and swim under this thing. Like, but dude, I would have never like even known that thing existed without listening to this astronaut on Joe Rogan. This guy was fucking crazy. He's like short. He's like 5'4", and he was talking about how when he first got into NASA, they were telling him he would never be able to do a spacewalk because the spacewalk suits are somewhat one size fits all. They can adjust a few parts on it, but in general, they are what they are. And he was really short, so everyone was telling him like, "You're never gonna get to do a spacewalk. Your arms are too short. You're too short." And he kept training with the thing, and like one of the other astronauts was like helping him figure out ways that he could make his arms reach farther, like different ways of positioning himself. And then he went to the people that make the suits, and he got them to adjust a couple parts on it, and he ended up doing like 3 or 4 spacewalks. And the guy that was telling him you'll never do a spacewalk, just like a normal like military looking dude that was in NASA, never got to do a spacewalk. But yeah, there's good ones. You got to be picky and choosy because he'll have a lot of the same comedians on that you've heard, you know. And I'm sure you don't want to hear another Joey Diaz, like fucking cocksucker, you know.
Yeah, I'm not.
Yeah, but he'll have good ones. The Elon Musk one was kind of dry. Elon Musk is like too smart for his own good.
Intelligent.
There's a disconnect.
Very driven, though.
There's a disconnect there, though, when he's talking to normal people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, I'm sure he has some sort of Asperger's or something.
Definitely.
But yeah, he doesn't make for the best podcast host because he's too smart, I think, or the best podcast guest. Anyway, it's good. But yeah, 3 hours. That's a Joe Rogan show.
Is this your longest one ever?
Yeah, I think so. I think even the ones I did by myself were shorter.
Do you do this every night?
No, so I was doing it every night when I was by myself, and then I decided that, I'm not the most entertaining guy. Very few people can do a show by themselves.
It's really hard.
It's really hard. And I could have kept doing it. I don't know how well it was working, but I decided if I can get guests, if I can get people to come in here and talk to me, maybe I won't be doing it every night, but when I do it, it'll be more entertaining. More people want to watch it. And that's kind of where I settled on it. So, anything else you want to add before we sign out?
No, it's been a pleasure. It's been fun.
It's been fun. Cody will be back. This is my brother. I am going to hound him to come back as often as he can. Please like and subscribe if you guys stop by. Thanks a lot. Leave a comment down below letting me know how the audio